All right, good morning again. Welcome to the Tuesday, October 18th, 2016 Board of Supervisors meeting. San Mateo County, would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everybody. Roll call, please.
Supervisor Pine is absent. Supervisor Groom.
Present.
Supervisor Horsley.
Here.
Supervisor Tissier. Here. President Slocum.
Here.
Agenda.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that Supervisor Pine won't be with us today. He is out of the country, actually, studying sea level rise and levees, and was invited by the government of Denmark, I think, Netherlands, to go over there and study that that system that exists over there. So that's where Supervisor Pine is. And should we move to public comment?
Sure. Public comment is reserved for persons wishing to address the board on county-related matters that are not otherwise on this agenda, as well as items that are listed on the consent agenda. Speakers will be limited to 2 minutes, and an extension can be provided to you at the discretion of the board president. So first we have Mr. Martin Fox.
Good morning, President Slocum, members of the board, Mr. Callaghan, County Council, Mr. Byers. Thank you for your service to the county, and thank you for authorizing assisted outpatient treatment known as Laura's Law. Please waive all of the civil and criminal immunities that the Landerman-Peters Short Act provides to those who decide to stop or deny treatment to persons living with serious mental illness who do not meet Laura's Law multiple hospitalization, incarceration, or incidents of violence criteria. Assisted outpatient treatment is a more compassionate response to those who live with serious mental illness, complicated by an inability to understand their need for treatment, as well as compassion for those affected by the consequences of their behavior, including their families, than the intellectually and morally bankrupt Landerman-Peters Short Act. Assisted outpatient treatment provides the intensive case management that produces effective and economic recidivism reduction, but at the cost of using multiple hospitalizations or incarceration or incidents of violence eligibility criteria. The intellectually and morally bankrupt Landerman-Peters Short Act criteria creates the very dangers to self and others by protecting those who decide to stop or deny treatment, even if they would otherwise be liable for their negligence or even guilty of a crime. Please acknowledge the pain, suffering, and deaths that the intellectually and morally bankrupt Landerman-Peters Short Act has visited upon Yanira Serrano's family, Errol Cheng's family, and Millbury officer Chakuti's family by waiving all of the civil and criminal immunities that the Landerman-Peters Short Act provides to those who decide to stop or deny treatment to persons living with serious mental illness who do not meet Laura's Law multiple hospitalization, incarceration, or incidents of violence criteria. Thank you.
We have no more public comment.
Thank you. Let's see, we'll move to set the agenda. Anybody want to make a motion?
So moved. Second.
And this is to both set the agenda and approve the consent agenda as well, correct?
That's absolutely right, thank you. Moved and seconded, all those in favor?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you. Now we'll move to item number 1, presentations and award. The first item will be led by Supervisor Groom, and it's a presentation of a proclamation designating October 2016 as Disabilities Awareness Month.
Thank you, Mr. President. We do this every year to introduce Disabilities Awareness Month, and I would make a motion to accept the proclamation.
All those in favor? Aye.
We have a number of people in our community who have some form of disability. We also have a number of people in our community who work very hard to help those people with disabilities have a much more easy and better life. Our Commission on Disabilities, as for a number of years, has made sure that they take action and recommend to us to go to Sacramento with certain pieces of legislation. So again, we can make sure that those people who have disabilities have all the necessary things they need to live a very strong and productive life. Just this last Saturday in South San Francisco, the Commission on Disabilities put up an event called Stepping Up for Independence. And that was a resource fair for people with disabilities and their families. There were several hundred not-for-profits and other organizations there. The attendance was quite good, even though it was a misty, rainy day. And I was just so pleased with the quality of displays we had, as well as the amount of people who attended. And I hope got some new tools and learned about some new organizations that could help them and their families. So with that, let me introduce, there she is, the president of the Commission on Disabilities, Susie Castoria, and ask her to receive our proclamation.
Thank you very much for the proclamation, and good morning, Mr. President, honorable members of the board, county managers, Mr. Byers, and everyone here present today. This is our 25th anniversary, so possibly this is the 25th time you've heard from a member of the Commission on Disabilities, and I am Susie Castoria, the current president. The COD was first established in 1991 and was charged with bringing to the Board of Supervisors issues that impact the disability community. What challenges are being faced? Do you know how hard that is? We can tell you what we're working on, what we're working towards, but to tell you what isn't working is a challenge in itself. In 1993, the COD's mission had expanded to identify unmet needs, strengthen existing services, coordinate planning, and develop an action plan to promote public information and education about the needs of persons with disabilities. It was recommended in this plan that county staff be informed and trained on ADA and its requirements, and that this training include an understanding of, and sensitivity to all disabilities covered by the ADA. In the last 25 years, we have worked on many initiatives and projects. We've compiled a timeline of the last 25 years, and there were some repeating themes. And if anyone would like to see the timeline, let me know, because it's fascinating. The needs that are reoccurrent are affordable and accessible housing, physical and programmatic access to all services and programs as outlined by law, outreach and education to county staff and all residents of San Mateo County, accessible voting, and recognizing those who have made positive impacts. The Commission has worked over the years to bring these concepts to the correct place. Housing is an ongoing issue that we struggle with on many levels in the county, and there are many, many people working on it. A member of the COD serves on the Community Block Grants Committee under the Department of Housing to be sure that those buildings that use federal or county funds meet the standard. Access to service and programs is something where San Mateo County continues to lead. We hold symposia, conduct ADA site visits, help review policies, such as the ADA policies and procedure that the Executive Committee recently adopted, and advocate for improved assistive technologies as they are developed. Reliable transportation needs are one of the top concerns in both the disability community as well as the senior community, and it remains challenging. Outreach and education is ongoing, and we take pride in being a resource for both county staff as well as individuals. We have held our 9th Transition to Independence Fair, which Supervisor Grimm briefly mentioned in her remarks. Thank you. And I brought you all T-shirts, so I'll get them to you. Despite the foul weather, we had nearly 300 attendees and 60 vendors? 50 vendors. Congratulations to Commissioner Marola and his team. It was a great success. Accessible voting has come a long way with the development of the VAC and the involvement of the Elections Office. Recognition was easy this year, as we had an anniversary lunch and many of you attended. Thank you. Mr. Maltby in his closing remarks was inspiring when he stated that access to services and programs, what the ADA requires, is more about allowing people to participate in democracy and self-government. The more that one can determine one's day-to-day successes, the more one is likely to be involved in their community. I mentioned challenges at the beginning of this, and there are still some. Because the County of San Mateo is the largest provider of services to the entire community and the disability community at a higher rate, we need to ensure every time any department changes a service, a program, or the height of a counter, it should be done with an inclusive goal to meet everyone's needs. Each department needs to lead by example. In this respect, there are many resources available. Building and planning are there to help with code compliance. The department ADA coordinators are there for their staff, and department heads need to identify them and be sure they are trained. The Commission on Disabilities is here as a resource for everyone, and we are thrilled when you contact us, so always feel free. In looking forward to the next year, the Executive Committee will be meeting to establish our 2017 goals at our upcoming meeting. We hope to focus on education, outreach, and to continue what the board has asked us to do. I personally am glad that there are strong leaders ready to tackle our ongoing issues and to continue to lead the COD. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
We want to thank you, Susie, for your leadership. We want to thank Vince and our other commissioner who are here today, Michelle McKeno and Craig McCullough, who are the lead staff people for the Commission on Disabilities, and continue with your fine and wonderful work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Supervisor Green.
Carol, I just want to take note, if you look at the resolution creating this commission, you'll see the clerk of the board is Elaine Walton Horsley. That's how far back this goes.
I remember her. She's my wife.
1991.
Yeah.
1991.
Congratulations to you. You've done a great job with this,
Yeah.
Carol.
Thank you, Carol. Okay, we'll move to item number 2, 9 a.m. Meeting, which is departmental performance reports. You remember our last meeting, and for the next couple of meetings, we're having departmental performance reports. And today's schedule calls for the Human Services Agency, the District Attorney, Probation, and the Coroner. And we're going to begin with Ms. Rodriguez from the Human Services Agency, and there she is.
Good morning, Mr. President, honorable members of the board, Mr. Callaghy, Mrs. Jensen, Mr. Byers. It's a pleasure to be here. This morning, I'll present the budget and performance report for the Human Services Agency. The mission of the agency is to enhance the well-being of children and families by providing professional, responsive, caring, and supportive services. The vision is that all of San Mateo's residents enjoy in a healthy, safe, prosperous, and thriving collaborative community. In terms of our performance measures, here you'll see the percent of public assistance applications processed within the state standards of 90%. You'll see we've made improvements over the last 3 years. We continue to struggle with the Medi-Cal performance. That is the first bar to the left, and that is due in large part to the Affordable Care Act system, Cal HERES, which has many workarounds and takes hours, if not in some cases days, to process an application. Another measure we monitor is regarding to, with our children and family services, the exit of the children in foster care to a permanent home within 12 months. You'll notice that we've made significant strides in this particular measure. We're at 53.2% of children exiting within the 12 months. That's what I understand is the highest in the Bay Area. Here we have our percent of clients placed in unsubsidized employment. As you know, we are in an economy that has extremely low unemployment. So those individuals who who we're helping through our public assistance programs who are able and capable of finding work are having a relatively easy time of locating employment. That has risen over the last 2 years, 18%. In terms of customer overall satisfaction, we're at 93%. The staff do an excellent job of serving our residents. They're compassionate and caring, and demonstrated in the care surveys we receive. Our cost per capita increases. We did not make the benchmark, as you can see, but that is due to the board's commitment through Measure A to fund various initiatives in the department, so that has increased the cost per capita. The percent of employees rating the experience of work in the county as good or better. The agency is still transforming from where it was 3 years ago. It's a changing organization, and while our engagement rates are improving, we still have a ways to go. The percent of children in foster care visited by their social worker each month. That's a federal measure, and each child is to be visited at least once per month, and we're at 98%. We've made significant progress in this measure also. You see we're at 98%. Here we reflect the foster youth and those youth that are enrolled in college or graduating from high school or receiving their GED. The red bar shows we are at 82% in terms of our youth graduating from high school or receiving their GED. That's pretty much on par with our state and national average. We also track those youth that are exiting our program and enroll either in college or vocational training. We're at 70%, we missed our desired target by about 2 percentage points, but that is the highest we could find in terms of national ratings. Nationally, it's not really tracked. You have anywhere from 5% to 60-some-odd percent, and California does not track this measure in terms of what occurs to our youth after they graduate from high school. CalFresh, here's another measure we have, and CalFresh is measured by the engagement of those residents residing at 125% of the federal poverty level or below. You'll see that the performance here has declined in terms of the saturation in our county, and we looked at whether or not is it the individuals moving out because of the housing crisis, and we couldn't find a direct linkage. But what we're also exploring in terms of trying to engage more of our residents who may be eligible for this benefit is direct enrollment with our high schools and, our schools throughout the county, and working with the principals to do some outreach directly to the parents. We also are working with the state in terms of geocoding and finding that where it appears we have opportunities are in those areas of our county in the north, in central region, and in the south, where transportation may be an issue. So we have purchased a mobile van. The purchase order is in, and we should receive it by the end of the year. And we'll start going out to these communities in an attempt to directly enroll in the neighborhoods. So taking public assistance programs to the neighborhoods where our residents reside. This is employment in terms of our VRS clients, our vocational rehabilitation services. These are clients who are our AB 109 behavioral health clients. You'll see that the caseload has dropped, but we also, these are the clients with the biggest barriers to employment. They have mental health disorders or substance abuse, and in many instances, both. So it's difficult. They're the hardest to place, even with a robust economy, and we're working with our partners in terms of getting that population employment ready. The work participation rate, it's a federal measure for our employment services. The federal measure is at 50%. You see, we have made strides in that area, but there's still a ways to go. The state has some aspects of the program which are tailored to California, which impact this measure. And you'll see that the blue bar targets where the state wanted the counties to reach that 30% mark, and they would then remove those people who under the federal guidelines would be ineligible, thereby reducing the denominator. So 30% was the target, and we did reach the state target, but our goal is to get to the 50%. Here is the Corps service agencies, and as you know, a couple years back, we moved the Corps to some technology, the Clarity system, and this tells us how well are we linking our residents who are accessing social services through our Corps agencies to our public assistance programs. You'll see that we're at 87% in terms of linking them to public assistance. So the mere fact of perhaps identifying them, we're doing a better job working collaboratively with the Corps and our partners. Our homeless point in time, broken out where we've been. There's been a drop in terms of our overall homeless count in that endeavor. You see that the green section points out our veterans at the 2015 count. The red area are chronically homeless individuals, and then the blue are homeless families still in our system. In terms of highlights, looking back at the year or so, we're proud of our Children and Family Services who received and our Human Resources Agency. They're awarded the CSAC Awards for the STEP internship program. Our Veterans Commission, thank you to the support of the President of the Board, a commission was established, and we'll be doing a stand-up event and more resources for our vets, and outreach has increased. The Fatherhood Collaborative, we were asked to develop a new work group for dads with a multidisciplinary or a multi-department approach, and with our partners at probation, the health system, and the libraries, child support, we re-engineered the work group and have now resources available for fathers in terms of employment and how to access services through a hotline in our county. Our homeless efforts, we've launched the Rapid Rehousing pilot with the support of your board, our Housing Locator initiative, and expanded the homeless outreach teams, HOT, to a regional approach. We've spent an enormous amount of time recreating and modernizing the training within the agency. With the support of the President of the Board, there's also an Immigrants Affairs Officer located within the agency, and they've just had a successful Immigrant Summit. They've been providing resources to new immigrants and immigrants at our libraries, all resources available. Our communication, there's always things occurring, and it's a changing, evolving agency. We did our first mid-year report in June, and in March we released the Homeless Strategic Plan, which was adopted by your board. In terms of alignment, we continue to work on aligning our budget, our agency strategic plan, and our branch plans to support those initiatives that we believe will improve outcomes for children and families and the residents of this county. In terms of training, it's been a huge endeavor, not only in terms of creating policy manuals for our employees these last 2 years, but we've delivered just recently within this one fiscal year over 30 sessions and put over 350 employees through these various segments of training to refresh and improve their skills and knowledge of the programs we deliver. Looking forward, we've been using Lean Six Sigma to deal with the Affordable Care Act, and it's an initiative that will not be unique to our economic self-sufficiency programs, but all the agency, and it's the lens we'll use to look at our processes and procedures. Feedback I've received from staff is that they really like it. They get to decide how to re-engineer services. We tell them what we would expect at the end of the process, but they really are developing how to deliver services. Enhancing our automation technology. We've done a lot of that these last 2 years, but there's still a lot of technology within the agency that needs to be modernized. Are working to connect our clients to employment faster, offering career development opportunities to our staff, and never taking our sight away from our foster youth in terms of ensuring that they continue to graduate from high school and attend college or vocational training. Another initiative we'll be focused on in the coming years is reaching that functional zero goal, which this board is so committed to in terms of homelessness, a vet stand-down event, and providing in-custody programming at our new jail at Maple Street. In terms of challenges that we see today, implementing the homeless strategic plan, obviously with the housing crisis, is going to be challenging, and reorienting sometimes some of the partners' programs. In addition, we have the continuum of care reform, which impacts our foster youth, our children and family services, where there's a paradigm shift and a philosophy shift, which I think we all agree upon, that children should grow up with a family and not in institutions. For us, the challenge is going to be recruiting enough families so that all children can reside in a loving family environment. Our Medi-Cal funding, the state is going through developing a new methodology and allocation, which could impact our funding stream. It's something to be watchful of in the coming months. Contract standardization with the new federal guidelines, the super circular, in terms of requiring procurement of all our contracts and bringing them under the new federal requirements. That will be a challenge, and how we get them all done in a timely manner. And then as we're reorienting our homeless system, the transitional housing defunding by the federal government, we have to work with our partners here in the county, Life Moves, Safe Harbor, to ensure that they don't lose critical funding for beds that we so direly need while we try to solve this issue of homelessness. That's just some of the Measure A initiatives. You'll see that it's homelessness, our foster youth, family resource centers in terms of FRCs, and our veteran services, to name a few. In terms of specifics in some of the investments of Measure A, you'll see foster youth linked with CASA volunteers have increased. Homeless encounters by the HOT team, they have increased. The percent of homeless participating or receiving public assistance program, linking them to public assistance, is at 96%. And the number of referrals to abode for case management and housing location has also increased. The pilot is going well. I want to give you a snapshot of our homeless veterans, and you'll see how it's declining. I believe we are at 183 there as 2015, but as of today, I think we're at 87 total and continuing to drop. The Center on Homelessness and our partners have done a stellar job in this arena. Our total sources you'll see have gone up a bit. It's the Measure A investment that your board have made. The total requirements are up just a bit, and that's our negotiated salary increases. I'd like to share with you directly from our clients the impact your investments have made on homelessness. And if you'll indulge me for just a moment.
Mary, Mary had came down, she had cured cancer. I didn't know what cancer was. I mean, I knew what cancer was, but I didn't know about it. She went through the treatment, she went in remission, and we thought everything was fine. And what happened is the cancer came back. And it was like a surprise.
It was 2,500 they agree on for one room, with just one bedroom, 2,500. 2 months later, he wanted more. He wants 3,800 now. So when we said no, my husband got into with him and he kicked us out that same night.
I was in the U.S. Army for 3 years. I got discharged as a specialist, personnel specialist. See, they call them spec fours at the time. And then let's see what I do after I got out of the service. Then I just started working, just regular civilian jobs. Generally was a cashier or a desk clerk or whatever. And then I started getting in trouble. So I'd go in and out of jail.
Bode called us, you guys called us on the phone, and
Kalia called us.
you called us, and I was driving, and Mary was talking to Kalia, and I'm like, who is this? How did they get our number? I'm all skeptical. What is this?
We're in a transitional home, and we also have a saving aside, beside our own personal saving, and it's pretty good.
Maple Street's been here for me, and I'm just giving back to them what they've given to me, and now they want to hire me as a full-time employee, and I feel pretty proud of myself for accomplishing all that.
You helped us out a great deal, and this was good. I mean, I can't tell you how good it is. Yeah, I was in tears. I am now just thinking about it, but it's the best thing that you guys did for us.
Yeah, thank you.
And I appreciate it.
Be good.
On behalf of our clients and those people that you are directly impacting through your investments and your commitment to solving homelessness, I want to thank you. I want to thank Mrs. Jensen for her support. She's our liaison on these projects and our Center on Homelessness. So with that concludes my presentation. And I'd like to thank our staff who show up every day committed to doing a stellar job for our residents. And I want to thank my team. Without that leadership team, it would be impossible to do my job. So thank you.
Thank you for that report. We'll move to comments and questions. We'll start with Supervisor Tissier.
Yes, Ileana, you answered one of them. I was going to ask you, are we putting a special emphasis on getting foster youth to college? And it appears that our vocational school, you emphasize that on a future for one of your priorities. Do we help the foster youth with their education? Do we try to get them scholarships? Do we help them with their books? I mean, do we incentivize so that it makes it easier for them to go to college?
We do. I could provide the board with information later in terms of the budget. But because of the investment this county has made, we're able to serve all AB 12 youth. That's not the situation in all counties. Any and all youth that engage in after they emancipate, we're able to support. We do books, we do first and last months, not just once, but numerous times as they mature and learn how to manage their budgets.
Okay, that'd be helpful. Whatever information you can provide on that, that'd be great.
Supervisor Groom?
Thank you. I was puzzled, Ileana, by the new federal requirements on contract standardization. I mean,
well,
could you just give me a couple little explanation?
It's the super circular, and there's always been what is called as OMB, Omnibus A, Apple 87, that really told agencies such as ours that receive federal funds what you could use the funding for, what's allowable. Well, now they've taken various omnibus bills and put them into a super circular, and those requirements that used to be just for governmental agencies are now extending to contracts. So allowable expenses that we would have are the same for the entities we contract with if they have federal dollars. It also requires an annual audit, to name just a few.
And so does it make it more, it makes it more complicated for our not-for-profits to do their work?
I don't know that it's more complicated. Certainly, it requires procurement of services, so you have to go out and procure, and I think that's a good thing because it's an opportunity for our partners to provide us with what it costs them to do business, and then we opt to fund it or not based on what the responses are. There is an audit requirement each year, but it's things that I think they routinely do.
So it's not really harming our ability to perform services, just making them a little more administratively complicated?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Horsley.
Thank you, President Slocum. Well, I guess I would, that's kind of moved by your clients. So I'd like to thank you and your staff for the work that you do. And it's pretty impressive what you do. One of the things that I was kind of curious about, you were talking about the defunding of transitional housing federal grants. How's that going to affect our expansion of Maple Street?
Well,
Do we
I think
know?
we're fortunate that we've got Measure A to transition, and we've been chatting about backfilling in those instances, but it's really requiring our partners to think about, is it emergency shelter or rapid rehousing? It was something we chatted about 2.5 years ago that was on the horizon. It's here. It's making our partners less competitive when they submit for federal funding. And we've gotten a little over $9 million in federal funding in our homeless program. So it's something we want to work with our partners to make sure that we stay competitive and that we keep the funds that we've been allocated in San Mateo to help our residents. So it's tricky. We're engaging Safe Harbor and Life Moves. Everybody's aware now that a shift in business model is necessary, and it's just, how do we go about doing this?
Are they actually shifting funding into the rapid rehousing?
They are. So as communities become less competitive, if we lose, then it may go to another community who's committed to rapid rehousing.
Well, I assume we are committed to rapid rehousing too. I'm just
Yes, we are. We've got Abode, and we actually were able to secure an additional, I think, just short of $2 million because of our shift towards rapid rehousing and coordinated entry.
Oh, okay, just again, just thank you and your staff. That excellent report. Thanks.
Thank you.
Just a couple questions, if I could, pretty specific questions. We some time ago, maybe 1.5 years or 2 years ago, created an arrangement with recycling, South Bay Recycling, to provide workers for the recycling efforts at the center off 101 there. And with the recent fire that took place there, I guess there were actually 2 fires, wondering, I understand 11 workers were laid off from the facility, and I'm wondering what happened to them. Did they go into a VHS program, or are they just unemployed? What happened there?
The 11 workers were South Bay Recycling workers. I think that's just recently. In terms of the staffing, we had 4 permanent staff, which we've reallocated internally within our employment services. And then our clients who were working there, we offered to assist them with employment and re-engaging. So whether it was helping with interviews or helping with resumes, and then of course, we do the job fairs at our JICs, our job information centers in the regions, in terms of getting them reemployed.
Thank you. And then just one other question, if I could. In East Palo Alto, I understand there's a growing number of homeless folks in East Palo Alto, and I know you've had some meetings there. I'm wondering if you can just describe where we are with that process now.
I think we've got the hot engagement. There has been some activity. I'd have to look into East Palo Alto specifically. As I've mentioned in the past, I think what's occurring is we engage, more people come in, and that's somewhat the nature of this issue. So with more specifics, I can go back and research with Selena what's going on specifically in EPA.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Any other questions? Nope. Thank you for that great
Thank you.
report. Appreciate it. Good work. Okay, move to safe neighborhoods. Item B on the agenda. First up is District Attorney Honorable Stephen Wagstaff.
No, the chief probation officer just offered me some of his time, and I told him I don't need it. Ms. Rodriguez was 10 minutes short, and she told me I could have her time. So we will keep this under an hour. Good morning, President Slocum, Supervisors Tissier, Groom, and Horsley, Mr. Callaghy, Ms. Jensen, and Mr. Byers. Good morning. And I always look forward to talking to you because it's an opportunity to go beyond what I do each month when we submit to you our monthly report, where we get to talk about what your district attorney's office is doing in San Mateo County. And to that extent, this is an opportunity to talk about some things that we don't talk about in the monthly report. Let's see if I get the right direction here. Oh, I did. What an honor. Okay, first success. But we move on to the mission. The mission of the district attorney's office, by definition, has not changed and does not change in terms of what we do, in terms of our duties, in terms of prosecution of offenders, providing support to victims, and enforcing our consumer and environmental laws, as well as doing investigative support and our own investigations into criminal conduct in San Mateo County. What is changing, and that's a topic for a much longer discussion, is the manner in which that's occurring. The criminal justice system is evolving. It's been going on now for 5 years, and I can assure you, as you know from your reading, it's going to continue to evolve. And that means that we evolve. That means our approach to doing prosecution, our approach to how we interact with our community evolves also. But I said that's a much longer conversation. The basic core statistic for your evaluation, of course, is the number of cases that we're reviewing and prosecuting. And you can see it's remaining fairly static. We went up about 5% in the last year. And as always, the reasons for that are as unpredictable and unascertainable as one can see. There is nothing in particular that we can say has occurred that's increased. We did have a major shift in the last 2 years with Prop 47. Where approximately 1/3 of our felonies are now misdemeanors. But we're still prosecuting them, and that hasn't changed in any fashion. But in terms of overall prosecution, we continue to do that. Of the cases submitted to us by law enforcement, it continues to range at approximately, it'll vary between 10 and 14% of those cases we choose to say do not belong in the criminal justice system for a whole variety of reasons. That can include insufficient evidence, probably the most common one. It will also include things such as a case that we reviewed that I brought to my attention out of Foster City in the last 2 weeks, where it was sort of a road rage argument between two people, and we said, we're not going to get into the middle of that. That is something that doesn't belong in criminal justice. If the two of them want to sue each other, they can have at it in our civil courts. And so that would be part of why you see that differential there between the blue and the red on that line. The percent of this relates to our Victim Services Center, the percent of satisfaction with our customers. And as you can imagine, with the 16 men and women who work in my Victim Services Division, they get a favorable response because they truly are very similar to, I think, what you heard from Ms. Rodriguez about the caring and kind people providing services to people who've, in one form or another, have had their life that they thought was going down a straight road make a left turn. And they very often, we try to help them get back to that road or as close to it as they can, and we do a good job in that approach. This is, of course, the evaluation that we get to do with Donna Valancourt, and it is it's down a little bit, but this is one thing I can correlate for you. That little drop-off sort of correlated when we went to our case management system a year and a half ago. It's tough. It's an adjustment. We're still adjusting. We're still in the process of implementing it. And it has, at least, it's putting a lot of work on people. And there are times, I think some people might like to say, hey, can't we just go back to those old DACUS items that your wife had when she was running our division of support in our office? But we continue to march forward, and they're seeing as we get further along that really is of great benefit. Employee evaluations, 100%. We mandated that. They all get done. They know it because they know that I read every one of them. And so to that extent, they know if I'm reading it, there better not be any holes in their list of people who are evaluated. And they do. And they do good evaluations. And the main goal is to let people know how good they're doing or areas that they can be better than what they're doing. More importantly, what I wanted to talk about here is our highlights. Now, you'll note something, for example, that's not on here, because I've talked to you about that in monthly reports, and that's our elder abuse prosecution unit. We've talked about that. That's our collaboration with the county council, with the adult and aging services, and I can tell you that it's with Measure A money that you've provided us, dramatic difference. It's really phenomenal what that group of men and women doing on cases that are coming to us and we're able to prosecute, we couldn't do, was not happening 2 years ago. If there is a hardcore thing, you can look at our office as to, has Measure A money you've given us made a difference? We can stand on the mountaintops and shout that one out that it does, and it has, because it's been a tremendous, and so we remain grateful to you and to the county manager's office for letting us have the funding to accomplish that. I've got 2 prosecutors and an investigator in that who have a passion unmatched. It's really wonderful what they're doing and their ability to deal with people into their high 90s and to make them feel comfortable, as we do have to bring them to court to testify about how they have been abused. But on a more immediate level, I want to talk about what we have accomplished, our highlights. Implemented e-subpoenas. You know what that is? That means that in our effort to continue to go electronic, what it means is that every police officer who no longer gets that piece of paper that, I know when you were sheriff, Supervisor Horsley, there was that paper would flow. Right now, we have all of their email addresses, and both the agency gets it electronically, and they get it on, it can be their cell phone, their iPad, their home computer. And they get the subpoena, and they acknowledge it to us, and that is now in place for every agency, or almost every agency in the county. CHP, on a statewide basis, can't jump in with a ship, but we're doing it with the San Francisco Police Department at the airport. We're doing it with all agencies. It's a wonderful step. Following on where our next step that we'll talk about, though, is in a moment, but to keep moving towards something that started with Ms. Jensen with SMC Saves, when we wanted to start going paperless, and you were the one who helped us get started in that several years ago, and that march continues on to the sea, and Sherman's March to the Sea, as we destroy paper in our path. And it really is really good. Mrs. Guidotti is in charge of that for me. My chief deputy has been the one to have the fun to become a computer nerd that she never thought she would be, and it is, when I need help with what to do, I run to her. What does this mean? How can I get that? And it's really good. She was in charge of e-subpoena along with Ms. Padilla of our office, and it's really successful. I didn't know how quickly we would get that in. We had an excellent case against Embassy Suites, a civil enforcement where they had, you may remember from a couple of years ago, a pilot who was there. They had old boilers in Embassy Suites there that his life was completely changed. He never flew again. He was a pilot staying there. They thought he would die from the fumes that were exposed because they were violating environmental laws, and we sued them for that. We had an excellent settlement bringing in, I think, ultimately somewhere in the area of $600,000 or $700,000 to the county in penalties. He has separately in his lawsuit was made amends, but he doesn't walk, and his life was basically changed forever by that. And we do take cases like that and successfully go through that. We have our Deferred Entry of Judgment program. This is a new program. As I said, we're still prosecuting people, but we're doing things in a different way. This was a program that we started in the last year and a half, where what we're doing is for low-level offenses, misdemeanor offenses. They can come in and they can enter a plea to the charge if they choose, and then go into the program where they get education and counseling or whatever it may be for these misdemeanors. They then have to do restitution, of course, has to be paid. They have to do some public service, and then they can come back and have that conviction set aside. So it's not on their record. It will not affect. And they can go look for a job and say, I have never been convicted of a crime. And so it's a good program for the misdemeanor low-level offenses. We have hundreds, I believe, who've taken advantage of this, and it covers a large number of our misdemeanors. We accomplish our goal. We hold them accountable, which is the role of a prosecutor, and at the meantime, we're not ruining their lives by having this misdemeanor on their record that might affect their ability to progress and be good citizens in our community. Another thing that we've started in the last 2 years is a volunteer attorney program. That was something I was hesitant about for a long time because I'm not a big fan of indentured servitude. But we've now had probably a dozen volunteer lawyers. We have 3 upstairs right now who work full-time. They do everything every other deputy district attorney does. They just don't get a deposit from you every other week in their account. But they are doing great work. Their benefit to them is they're getting into court. They're getting experience. And we've actually had several of them find jobs in other. We just had one who just finished her volunteer work with us, and she's now a deputy district attorney in Stanislaus County out there. So it's good in that sense.
Steve, can I ask you a quick question? Are these attorneys that are just getting into the practice, or are some of them older attorneys that have already retired and are looking to?
We haven't had retired lawyers yet, but we have had people who have been lawyers. We had a woman who worked with us who had been a prosecutor back in North Carolina, or back east or Virginia for 10 years. And then she moved with her husband out here to Silicon Valley for his business, and she was raising her kids, and after a while she decided she wanted to get back into it. And so she worked with us for, I think, 6 months, something like that. And today she's on the private defender program on that. So it's a good program. It serves us well. We haven't had the retired attorneys wanting to come back. Something about retired. I tried to get Mr. Fox to come back, but he said he wanted to do something with the state bar instead on that line. And so, but there's been a good program, and we're getting, as a community, we're getting great assistance, and we're giving great training to them. And then one of the most important ones in our community today is that we have created with our every one of our law enforcement agencies an officer-involved shooting task force. We continue, as the DA's office, continue in our county to be the primary investigating agency, and to any time an officer discharges his or her weapon and hits somebody, whether it's fatal or not, we investigate. Indeed, the last 7 shootings in San Mateo County where somebody was struck by law enforcement have been non-fatal. And for that, we're pleased. Our last fatal was, knocking on wood, was in November of 2014 down in Menlo Park. But we do the investigation. But rather than letting these things drag out, what we're doing is we have set up and trained a task force of approximately 40 law enforcement people within our county, all of whom who have detective experience, and they may even promote it up. Redwood City, one of the primary people, is now a lieutenant there. But he or she will come out and work with us and help. We're still the primary ones. We're going to do the investigation, questioning of the officer, questioning of primary witnesses, but it gives us a chance to do a lot of detail and get it done quickly, because our goal, and this is something I'm very proud of, you may have heard that in San Francisco, where this has been a big issue as to who does the investigation, and they've just and the mayor there is offering the DA there 14 new employees to take care of that. I assure you, I would never need so much to do, and we don't need so much because we have this collaborative task force. And nobody on the task force, if it's in their city, they can't be involved in it, of course. But what we do is, they said there, I read the article, 611 days is the average length of time from the time of the shooting until the report is completed. In our county, a rule we put in was 8 to 10 weeks, and we have not yet failed to meet it. And it's because we have this very intensive approach to it where we make sure everybody's interest is met. So I'm very proud of how that's worked out in an issue that's very, very important in our community today. I want to talk about our goals here coming up in the next budget period, and that is we are going further with our computer crimes unit. I have hired from the sheriff's office one of their ace sergeants to come over as an inspector, a fellow named Matt Brode, who's outstanding in his knowledge of computers, worked with REACT down in Santa Clara County at one point, and I have a prosecutor who we've sent to school. You know, the #1 school in the country on computer crime investigation and prosecution is in Alabama, and it's offered by the Secret Service, and they do it. And so I have sent my team down there to get that training, and it is something we're going to continue to work on and reach out, because we know, unlike what it was at one point where we just had a certain amount of high-tech companies, today we've got lots of them, from the Facebook, Genentech, Oracle, and on and on and on, as you know, in our county. And that means, and so often they're not really even aware that there's that place to go for investigation of the crimes. They'll settle them for, non-disclosure agreements or whatever it may be. I want to work very much on increasing the diversity of our attorney and inspector staff, and that's very important to me. As you may know, I'm involved with the State District Attorneys Association, and that's equally a project in my year as their president I've embarked on. I was in Sacramento all day yesterday talking about that very issue, what we can do to get our DA's offices to more reflect the community that we represent. And it will vary from county to county. In ours, and I've talked with our fellow DAs around the state, particularly Santa Clara County, about, in our community is finding a Latino prosecutors. It's not easy. It's not easy. And Santa Clara encounters it. They've gone so far as to send their hiring team back to New York, to Las Vegas, to try and find, it's a common problem in the state. And we're going to continue to work on that to try and make sure that, again, that our community has people that they can relate to in our office. And of course, prosecution of the Sunny Day defendants. That remains, none of them are pleading guilty. They have decided they want their trials, which are certainly entitled to. We have had one trial so far. Earlier this summer, 3 defendants went to trial. All 3 were convicted. Judge Novak is handling all of those cases, and she has set a schedule that it's an aggressive one. I hope she can keep it, but it will mean about another 5 trials, and it will take probably another 3 years to complete if she's able to keep the schedule. But I have 2 prosecutors who are full-time devoted to that. That is all they do, along with 2 inspectors that devote a major part of their time. And I'm grateful to the county manager's office that you have allowed me on a limited term, recognizing that over the course of it, the time it takes to get these trials done, I need to be able to backfill that, and you have done that for me in this budget, and I thank you for that. I am grateful for that. We want to take the next step on our going fileless, I'm told. I'll stop using the word paperless, I'm told. Going fileless, and that is to have the police file with us directly. That is a project that we're very hopeful we will complete in the next 4 or 5 months, where all the local agencies can file electronic. Because right now, all the agencies are electronically typing up their reports. They then have somebody at their agency that prints them out. They bring them over to us, and we then scan them in, and my prosecutors deal with them all electronically. Obviously, an enormous waste of time. And there's one other county, was the beta tester, Amador County. They've got it up and working, and we are testing now to be able where the police, all our agencies can work through us through the RIM system, the case management system they have, which we have, so that we can get that directly to our prosecutors and save an enormous amount of paper and time. And finally, the environmental crimes remains a high priority for me, and that's something I'm going to mention was one of our challenges as to why environmental is going to take a little different twist depending on the election here in about 3 weeks, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. And that gets to the challenges. And I'll say the 2 big challenges that we're talking about here are, number 1, maintaining and storing electronic evidence. What's the big thing? Everybody's getting it, every agency's going to have it, and that's a body cam of some sort. In our county, we're at around 3 or 4 have either that or the car cameras now. Well, what's very evident is what do you do if you have officers, 5 officers are responding to a car theft? All their cameras are on. All that has to be stored. Most of our agencies are going to the cloud, and we want to be able to reach up into the cloud, and we're working on that. Mrs. Guidotti has that as another project. And what we're trying to do is be able to get at that, but we have to watch those. And I told Mr. Maltby and Mr. Callaghan that's going to be an issue for us in the next budget cycle, is watching all of that video, because we have a duty to do so to make sure is there relevant evidence in there, and it's something we didn't have before. And now we do, and so how we do it, I certainly don't think lawyers need to be it. We can find something less to accomplish that end, but that's a big challenge for us and how we get to it. And the other is, of course, the prosecution of DUI cases for marijuana users. In states like Colorado, they found an increase in their DUI marijuana cases in the area of around 40 to 50% went up, and that's to be expected. And unlike alcohol, as you know, there's a test, 0.08 or above, you take the breath test, we can calculate what that is in your system. It doesn't exist for marijuana. There's some companies that are working very hard on it because they know there's a pot of gold at the end if they can develop that, but it doesn't exist now. So it's a concern we have for those cases because the THC, the active ingredient in marijuana, remains in the system for several days. So you don't know, unlike alcohol that we know. You can see it when you apply for your driver's test. 0.02 per hour, it drops off. We don't have that for marijuana. We don't. Colorado picked an arbitrary, I think, 0.5 nanogram, or 5 nanograms as a level, but there's not a scientific basis for it, and that's in the courts there. So that's an issue there. But on the environmental side, as I told you, that's interesting because the law changes quite a bit. There's the obvious change if Prop 64 passes. There's the obvious change about small amounts possession, the growing 6 plants. But there's the other part that doesn't get talked about. And that is in there that says that for marijuana selling, transportation, possession for sale, which have been felonies forever, and for those, they're now misdemeanors unless they fall within a particular category, like you have a super strike, something that you have 2 prior convictions for, things like that. It's now it sort of decriminalizes. What that means is our Mexican cartels who like to take the panga boats up our coast with hundreds of pounds on it and deliver them, that's a misdemeanor. And it's not a felony. And so that's the sort of the unspoken side of 64. So we're preparing for that. And what we're finding, and we've already done a couple prosecutions on the people who are doing grows. We had one up there near 92 in Skyline that we broke down and prosecuted the person who was there, who was growing the marijuana, but then taking it and throwing it into our streams. And we prosecuted him and convicted him of environmental violations for that. When we have one of the standard panga boat things on their coast where they take the bales of marijuana and they throw them into the ocean, so they'll go with the tide in, and there are people on the beach to pick it up. Well, those are going to be environmental prosecutions. So our environmental team is going to have a little bit of a different approach on a statewide level. We're talking about it, and those will be some of our challenges, depending on where things go. As I said, that initial mission statement remains the same. How we do it, it's a changing world, and we adjust to it on that line. And so to what I want to say again, as I've said to you, thank you. You provide us with the resources to do the job and keep a county that is safe. We are clearly one of the safest counties in the state of California, and that is in large part due to the great quality of law enforcement and the great work of the men and women of the district attorney's office and on that line. But it's also in major part because you give us the tools to do it. And I am grateful to the county manager's office, and I'm grateful to all of you to be able to have an office where I don't. And I do hear this from other offices as I travel the state that don't have the support from their board. And this office has had, going back to Mr. Sorensen's days in the 50s, 60s, and on, and Mr. Fox, you have always supported us well. And once again, I say thank you, as I will every year, for the support you give us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wagstaff. Questions?
That is a great report. And I was going to say, I happen to think you're the best DA in the whole Bay Area and maybe the state of California as well. You've just done a fabulous job. I'm kind of concerned about that 40 to 50% potential increase in DUIs. As I recall, there were about 6,000 DUI arrests in the past. I don't know if that's still...
Yeah, we're running about between 35 and 4,000.
Oh, it's gone way down then.
You know when it went way down? Mothers Against Drunk Drivers got
okay.
those laws changed back a few decades ago. It was a wonderful step that they took, and we've been fairly steady since then.
Yeah, but a 40 to 50% increase that in other states, that is dramatic, and that's going to have a dramatic impact.
It is. We're very concerned. I know we've talked with our law enforcement partners about developing better expertise, because some agencies will have somebody who's really well trained, but they all need to have that.
So what do they do now? Because if there's no test, is it just simply a field sobriety test, and that's it?
You know what? It's pretty much, we can get a successful prosecution if you have the very dramatic signs of it. You know, the weaving all over the road, the get out of the car and there, that the smoke comes billowing out of the car, and we get those, as you know. And it is, but if you don't have that, it's real tough. It's a very tough situation. I know they've had the trouble, and everybody's hoping that gradually there can be scientific studies completed on its use so that we can deal with them, rather than just simply what we do with a lot of them, insufficient evidence to prosecute.
So we're going to rely a lot on camera evidence?
Very much, we hope so.
Okay.
When our agencies get those cameras and they sit there and you can see the person sort of wobbling, because otherwise it's going to be, the officers, I saw him do this, and the person will say, I wasn't doing that. I was fine on that. Yeah, I did touch my nose. I didn't touch my forehead, that sort of a thing. Yeah.
How long are they going to have to store electronic evidence now with the cameras? Is that going to
Boy,
be 30 days, 60 days, a year?
Way beyond that. And the question is, that is one of the major issues, and it's being discussed statewide. It's just because it isn't the camera part. The cameras are available. They can get the cameras. They can have that part of it in their policies. They can have that. They being the law enforcement agencies, they can have that done in a matter of weeks. The big issue is the storage and the accessibility and the cost. I know San Mateo Police Department right now is going through the issue of what happens with the company you pick. If we sign a contract with you for 3 years, and at the end of 3 years we move over to another vendor, do we get to bring that with us, or does that company say they've got the rights to do what they want with it? Those are the issues that are out there right now, and to be resolved.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wagstaff. Good job. Good report. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
And how much time did I leave for the chief?
Not much.
Actually, Chief, we're going to take a 5-minute break right now. We're back. So we're going to start with Probation Chief John Keene.
Good morning, Honorable Board. Mr. Callaghan, Mr. Byers, Ms. Jensen, welcome and good morning, and thank you very much for allowing me to present to you this morning on behalf of the men and women of the San Mateo County Probation Department. You're going to hear some very consistent themes. It's very difficult to follow Mr. Wagstaff, and I'm going to do my best. But you are going to hear some consistent themes, and the first thing I'd like to start off with is thanking the men and women of my department who work very hard every day for the citizens of our county and the people that we have the pleasure of serving. They do honorable work, oftentimes under very difficult circumstances, and I appreciate them very much, and I know that the board appreciates them as well. So just want to start off with that. Much like what you heard from the district attorney's office, our mission has been pretty consistent throughout my tenure here, but there have been what I would say is an evolution as well in relation to our ultimate goal of working with offenders. While we oftentimes talk about the accountability and rehabilitation factor, as you've heard me say many times, we really are in the business of habilitating, and that job has actually taken a pretty dramatic toll, a dramatic change rather, I should say, in the recent years. What we've been able to do by working closely with people to find out what exactly is at the root cause of their criminality, we've often uncovered that there's much more work to do. And so while we constantly strive towards rehabilitation, the idea and concept that we are rehabilitating people or providing services to folks that, quite frankly, were not traditionally the roles of public agencies. It was the family, it was the teachers, it was the clergy, it was people in the community who would step in and be those pillars and teach those kind of, those grounding techniques and characteristics that really helped to raise us all. Oftentimes we find ourselves stepping into those spaces now more and more. And so that evolution by itself, quite frankly, has changed the future of our work. When we look at our department measures, we're very pleased to report that we are exceeding our targets in both people who are successfully completing probation at 83%, as well as people being supervised utilizing an evidence-based risk tool. One of the things that's very significant about that is, as I said before, we're finding out more and more about people, and the reality is that has been made more possible by the opportunity to utilize this evidence-based technology. It allows us to quite oftentimes discover issues with people in a very short period of time, which in the past may have taken us oftentimes months and sometimes years to break down and build rapport with individuals to really get down to what the core elements of what their needs are. We are very pleased to say that we are meeting and exceeding our outcome measures and benchmarks that are set by the board. As you've heard already by other departments, we are seeing that people consistently see that San Mateo County is an excellent place to work, and they feel good or better about that, and it seems to be increasing as we continue to do these surveys. Our engagement targets are exceeding the points we want. We're at 70%, which we're very happy about. And our cost per capita countywide is about 96%. It's one of those measures that, quite frankly, we don't have much control over, but we do our best to make sure that we are providing the data to show that we're working towards those goals as well. When you look at our employee evaluations, we do have a slight dip in the amount of evaluations that we've been able to accomplish over the last few years. This can be attributed to the fact that we have recently moved to a new system for our evaluation process. We're going to be doing some training this year, and you will see a significant increase in that number when I report for you in the future. We are happy about the fact that our surveys say that people feel good about the work that we do, but I have to be honest with you and tell you it's a very small sample size. And so we're going to try to work closely with Donna Valancourt and her team to see if we can find a different way to assess the work that we do and how the people who come to our doors feel about that work. We have quite a few highlights, but I want to highlight a few I think that I want to talk a little bit more about. One, we now will be utilizing one evidence-based risk tool for both adult and juvenile offenders. This is significant because in the past we utilized two different platforms that oftentimes didn't translate well for the young people who unfortunately transition into the adult system. As part of our goals to be more evidence-based in all the work that we do, our case management system will now look at individuals as people and not as adults or juveniles. And quite frankly, what that means is we have the opportunity to work with a young person who has an unfortunate opportunity to transition into the adult space. We already can take the information that we know about them, easily bring it over, oftentimes continue to work on goals that we set for them as a younger person or a young adult, and then seamlessly kind of pick that up into the adult space. That wasn't always the case before, but now with these two tools all speaking the same language, it allows us to do this at a better, more efficient manner. We also were able this year to receive our full certification as an evidence-based organization. In the past, you recall we had a provisional accreditation, but we've done all the work this year, and thanks to the men and women of my department, we've been able to achieve a full certification. As you've heard from other departments, we've worked really hard to focus on our new case management system. We're very proud to say that we have a go live in December of our new case management system. We know that that is just simply the beginning. Turning the switch on is just the beginning of the process. Many of our partners here in the county have been very gracious in sharing with us that their kind of pitfalls and challenges, and so we know some of the things to look out for. We don't think that's going to totally absolve us from challenges, but we do know that ultimately it's going to put us in a better space than many of our partners. But they've been very great in working with us in terms of letting us know some things to look out for. We've also worked really hard to create a military diversion caseload. We know that working and serving our veterans is an important reality here in our county, and we're very proud to be a part of that business. We also can continue to enhance our collaborations across the county departments. I think today more than ever, we have linkages between ourselves and HSA, behavioral health, our sheriff's department, working very closely with them to make sure that not only do we combine our resources and make sure we're utilizing them in an efficient manner, we're also working together to come up with new creative ideas to serve the county goals for the future. And you're going to hear something about that in the coming months as we're working on a zip code project where we will look at how we can focus our services in some of the areas that we found to be the most in need of that service. We also have our goals for the next budget calendar year, 17-19. One of the major things that we have tried to do and really want to focus in on is the implementation of an off-duty probation officer in the Juvenile Services Division. As we've worked closely with our juvenile families, we've discovered that, quite frankly, the complexity and high level of needs of these families extend beyond traditional work hours. So the normal 8 to 5 process in terms of working with these families, we feel like there's been a gap in services. And so much like what we have in our adult services, we're going to have an off-duty juvenile officer who will be able to not only assist the families, but also assist local law enforcement with questions around working with young people. Oftentimes, many times, young people are brought to our doors because they don't necessarily have a person to make contact with to see that that's not the appropriate place for that person to come, that they can go back to their family or family member rather than come to our juvenile hall. So we're really hoping that our off-duty officer can help assist with that, as well as provide some services to families when those are needed. We also have a goal of collaborating and implementing a new restitution court and DUI court for our adult offenders. As you heard, DUIs may be on a decline. However, some of the complexity of the DUIs and the need for services are at a different level. And so we're going to help to bifurcate out the DUI cases, have a set load of casework done specifically just for them, in hopes of making sure that we make the community safer in that regard. With regard to restitution, as you've heard not only from the district attorney, but from others in our county, making our victims whole, who by no account of their own have been victimized, is going to be a major approach for us in the coming years. That will be assisted by the creation of this restitution court, where we will have officers dedicated to collecting funds and assisting those victims, as well as working hand in hand with the district attorney's office. We also have a goal of improving our officer and field safety training. I'm going to talk a little bit in some of our challenges about why that's important. But when I came on board, one of the things I really wanted to do was to make sure that our officers had not only the tools they needed, but also training that was reflective of our changing world. From realignment to Prop 47, as changes have happened in our criminal justice system, it has impacted probation in ways that, quite frankly, was unforeseen. And one of the most significant impacts have been the fact that we now work with offenders that, quite frankly, were far more sophisticated and criminally and otherwise than we have worked with in the past. And as a relation and as a consequence of that, we've had to also improve the way in which we approach our work as well. So talk a little bit about our challenges. Right off the top, we have our implementation of our new case management system. While we are very excited about it, we certainly want to thank the board and the county manager's office for your support in helping us get this far with this system. But we recognize simply turning it on is just the beginning. All of the challenges that will come with making sure that we can maintain it and that we can create the space that we need to give you the data that we know that you want to make sure we're doing a good job, that's going to be an ongoing challenge for us in the coming years. It may include us needing to develop internal skills with probably new positions that are dedicated to the maintenance and support of these systems, but also just in the reality of just knowing that there's things that we don't know about what the system will or won't do well. So we recognize and flag that as a challenge moving forward. You've heard a little bit when Ileana spoke to you about the Continuum of Care Reform, CCR, that also impacts probation as well. While we certainly respect and recognize that the idea of closing group homes and having kids close to home to work with foster families is a very valid and I think mindful endeavor, the challenges that come with that are only magnified when you look at kids that are in the probation system. Trying to find families that will work closely with kids that are not in the probation system is a challenge. But bringing in kids who have multi-layers of difficulties, oftentimes issues that are both mental health related as well as behavior related, is going to be a significant challenge. And so taking those options away from probation and pushing us in this space to where we have to find foster families, we really believe that that's going to not necessarily work as well for our population.
Chief, before you go on, do you still work with the social workers on the continuum of care with a foster child who's or a teen who's in the foster system? It's a probation officer and?
Well, it depends. I mean, we've had opportunities to work with HSA, and we're one of the few counties that actually has a really good relationship between the two departments. And so we are able to look at those dual status kids where they are represented in both systems. However, if a kid is transitioning from AB 12 as a probation youth, we're primarily the ones working with them. So they won't necessarily have both, but we'll give, in essence, the same services. Now, the tricky part about this new population is that you're asking a probation officer to, in essence, step in to where a social worker traditionally would work. Right. So, some of our kids have challenges making that transition, but probation doesn't have any of the traditional roles that we will have them. So, for example, there are no search clauses. There is no There's none of those things that we would normally do. So we're in essence trying to provide a support to them, which oftentimes requires us to kind of learn a new hat to wear in a lot of ways. But I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue is, quite frankly, it is a system that, in all fairness to the state and the people who thought that it was a good idea, it's a system that, quite frankly, was half-baked and not provided enough funds to really create what needed to be put in place before it was asked to be implemented. I would have preferred, honestly, a system much like what we did for realignment, where there was funding, there was a period of time for us to create the services, and then plug the individuals in. We kind of been given the population and said, okay, make it work, and without any proper funding and also additional training.
So AB 12 has money for the former, I guess it is the former foster kid, but doesn't have any funding for probation.
Well, what it does is it provides money for the young people,
Yeah.
but what it doesn't do is there's no money for training, no money for implementation, no money for creation of services.
Pretty inadequate, yeah. Thanks.
And along those lines, Supervisor, the continual work in terms of looking at the multifaceted needs and complexities of our juveniles, you know that our hall population is down. The number of young people that we service is down. However, the level of challenges that each of these young people bring and their families bring to our system is unprecedented. Mainly because I think we do have the skills now to look at them closer, to find out what really is at the root. Now, on having that knowledge is only creating more work in terms of figuring out what services need to be offered, what programs need to be created, and how can we better support those families. So while the numbers may appear certainly to be on a decline, the actual work that comes along with each of these families has increased significantly. An additional challenge is the growth of our probation enforcement activities. As I mentioned before, we're working with a different population today than we worked with just 10 years ago. We are evolving in a way in which not only are we working with more sophisticated offenders, but our relationships with local law enforcement has become more complex. You'll see probation officers working very closely on many of the task forces that you hear about. As the DA talked about marijuana eradication, there are probation officers that serve on that team as well that are working on these areas. We have probation officers that work very closely in the gang task force units. So our work has changed dramatically. You heard the issue about body cams. A lot of the legislation that's out there does impact probation officers when it comes to body cams. So when I have to think about the idea of how do we implement that program with probation officers, and then the storage, as you heard before, is going to be a significant challenge to our budget. We're not quite sure if our new system that we're implementing will marry well with the new technology to store the data, and not to mention the request for information, acts that will come as a relation to the fact that we will start having body cam information as well. So it's one of those things that I think that hasn't been considered in terms of the impacts on probation and the work that we do. But all these different changes to our activities and our work in the enforcement arena has only emphasized the need for us to be safer, to have more adequate tools, and to provide training that is very different from what many of my staff started and kind of came into this field with. We've evolved tremendously in terms of this part of our work. And I think the most significant challenge, I would say, that will face our department in the next 2 years will be that of staffing. We have found that our issues are very consistent with most law enforcement agencies throughout the Bay Area and throughout the country. We have worked very hard to recruit. HR has been a tremendous ally with us in this endeavor. We have created new programs where we're sending probation officers and probation staff to local college campuses to try to recruit, to provide information. We have also had informational sessions where we try to give people information about what probation is and the wonderful field and the wonderful career that we think that we can offer folks. But the reality is we have had a very poor success rate in terms of bringing people on board. And it's not just simply about recruitment and getting numbers in. Anytime our job announcements go out, we get several hundred people who will apply. But I will tell you, I firmly believe that you can teach anybody any skill. I think that if you put enough effort into it, have a proper training program, and have committed trainers, you can teach a person a skill pretty easily. But what you can't teach a person to do is to have empathy and to care about folks and to be good people. So while we are certainly having challenges in bringing folks in, I'm committed to bringing in people who I think will further the goals of our county. With that in mind, unfortunately, many of our people are not passing background, and oftentimes we're finding issues of dishonesty throughout the process. And as that serves as a major concern, we'll have 800 people, and we'll whittle it down and maybe hire 3 people. And I know that may sound as if there's are you guys maybe being overly hard on folks and not giving people opportunities? Well, honestly, we've asked folks just to be honest with us, and we'll work with things because we realize young people make mistakes. We've all done things in our teenage years or early adult years that are not indicative of the men and women we will grow to be. However, we need you to be honest about that. So with that in mind, our challenges will be consistent around the idea of staffing. We're working hard, and we'll continue to work hard to try to do what we can do. Probably going to, in this coming months, we'll be looking more towards social media to try to put more information out about ourselves. I think I'm going to take a page off from the CHP and go get a billboard or something, and talk about what the benefits of coming to work for our department would be. But that said, it's a significant challenge. Quite honestly, it's probably the most significant challenge facing my department over the next 2 years. We have many of our folks that are doing excellent work every day. At some point would like to retire. And so when you look at that population, we have probably, I would say probably 20 to 25 staff in the next 2 years could potentially decide to retire if they chose to. Some of my staff are out in the audience today. I know the wheels are turning as well for them. But that's going to be our focus. We're going to have to work really hard at trying to make sure that we prepare. We've done a really good job internally around succession planning. I think that we have created a path for our young people to succeed and to step into management and leadership roles. It's just now kind of going back and rekindling the fire at the line level by bringing in brand new employees. So we have 2 success stories that we want to share with you. In the interest of time, I'll let you go over both of those. I was telling Ms. Rodriguez, I always feel very jealous and I have to go after HSA because everyone loves them and they have all these great stories and videos and everything else. And, people, it's hard for our folks because, they're not necessarily happy to meet us in the beginning. And so over time that gets better, but sometimes finding people who are willing to step in front of the camera is difficult because our folks are notoriously camera shy. But I will say that the juvenile success story, I think, really represents the importance of preventative work. I think the future for our probation work in terms of how we impact juveniles and their families is in the areas of prevention. I really am not upset about the fact that my numbers are low in my hall. I know there's been a lot of conversation and discussion about that. But the reality is that's the way it's supposed to be. Only kids should be there who deserve to be there, need to be there. Preventative work and the focus around that, I think, is really where our future is. And so much like in this story with the Boys and Girls Club, we have a lot of great programs that are doing great preventative work out there, and I hope that we're able to work with them and fund them more into the future. On the adult side, I think the adult success story is a great example of the habilitative work that our probation officers do every single day. When they're able to break down that resistance to having someone work with them, and they're able to work through the stages of change and accept the fact that here's a person willing to extend their helping hand to them, and they take that on, we see great things happen every single day. And this is an example of that. This is a perfect example of a person who needed help creating a new reality. And that's what habilitation really is about. Rehabilitation hopes that person is coming from someplace good and we just have to return them there. But as this story highlights, a lot of our people don't have that. And so it's a great example of that work that our probation officers and probation staff do every single day. From the very first person they meet at the receptionist desk to the probation officer and the folks they meet in court services, every single person in our department is committed to making sure that when they come to us, they're treated like human beings and they're taught that it's okay for them to have expectations and to be treated with respect. Lastly, our Measure A work. As you know, the board has been very supportive of our department, and one of the ways in which you continue to show your support for us is allowing us to be a part of the Measure A work that's happening in our county. We've chosen to take that effort and work with the commercially sexually exploited children, or CSEX, that we find in our jurisdiction. These young people, quite frankly, we probably know the least about this population than any population that we work with. We know they're here. We know they come to us oftentimes through very transient means, and we know we have a very limited opportunity to work with them when we have an opportunity to kind of connect with them. And so we really are going to be working over the next 2 years to really identify gaps in this space, to figure out where can we better put services and dedicate staff resources. Probation has 2 deputies right now that are dedicated to this work. We work very closely with our local law enforcement partners here in San Mateo County, but we're also doing some work with the federal government and FBI, who has kind of spearheaded a lot of this work around human trafficking and sexually exploited children in the Bay Area, as you know, which is unfortunately one of the hotbeds in the country for this work. So we will be passing out and doing a comprehensive report about what we think are some of the gaps, and I hope to present that information to the board at a later date. And with that, I would gladly take any questions you have.
Thank you, Chief. Questions? Supervisor Groom.
I just have a comment, Chief. I want to thank you very much for taking such a good, hard look at Camp Glenwood and Camp Kemp, because I think those were 2 of the most innovative programs we had, but I know as times change, they have to be retooled.
Yes.
But thank you for doing that, and I hope that they continue to be successful.
Thank you very much, Supervisor. I have to say, we really have worked really closely with our courts around that. Our courts have been leaders. Juvenile courts have been leaders in the idea of looking at what we can do different and better in both Camp Kemp and Camp Glenwood. As you said, these programs have been here for a very long time and have been on the innovative crust for a very long time. But like any program that's been running for 50 years, at some point you have to freshen it up. And so what we've tried to do over the last year is look at ways in which we can do that. There's going to be some new programming models at Camp Glenwood in the coming months. We're also training our group supervisors who work there to provide COG skills and to do different group sessions that will further our use of evidence-based practices in that space. And we're also going to be creating what we believe is an inside-out approach to services. A lot of our young people are fortunate enough to work very closely with group counselors and also with community-based providers while they're in the custodial setting. But then once they go back out in the community, that kind of linkage sometimes is broken. So what we're hoping to do is to create a space where those connections will stay intact moving into the future. So thank you very much. I know the men and women in those spaces appreciate that recognition.
I look forward to seeing how well they do. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Supervisor Horsley.
Chief Kane, I'd also like to congratulate you and your staff. I see a lot of them, and especially when they're going out to raids and they're all in their bulletproof vests and stuff, and they really look great, and I know it's a great addition to law enforcement. I just have a couple of questions. Actually, I probably would want to meet with you offline on them. Not today, because I don't think I doubt that you have, well, I don't know that you have the answer, but I'm actually really interested in a number of foster kids who end up in the system, not just the AB-12, but I'd like to talk to you about that offline. And I really appreciate the work you've done with Camp Kemp, but I really don't know what the redesign of Camp Glenwood is. So maybe you and I could spend some time. You can just kind of run through that for me.
Sure, I'd be happy to meet with you offline. But in essence, the kind of 25,000 foot view of what Camp, did you say Camp or Glenwood?
Camp Glenwood is what I meant.
Okay. 25,000 foot view look at the program at Camp Glenwood is really to try to figure out how do we bring an evidence-based approach to the work we're doing out there. It's one of those things, it's been one of those camps for a very long time that has relied on kind of anecdotal kind of responses, feel-good responses about the work that's being done out there. How do we know it works? Well, it just works. Well, how do we know? We just know. And so we really didn't have a clear way to say that we've been successful or not. We had a few cases over the years where they were high profile, and some of the kids that have kind of not worked well in the program have done some things, and it was kind of referenced that, well, maybe the program failed them. It's not our belief that the program failed anyone. It's our belief that, quite frankly, the program has to match the person who comes into it. And it's very difficult for any program to be all things for all people. And so what we really want to work hard at this year is identifying who's going to be most successful in that program and what type of programming needs to happen there to do that. And so we were able to bring in the leaders and, quite frankly, the people who know much more than me from all the fields who work out there, whether it was the evidence-based providers, the community-based providers, the schools, the courts. We had a couple of people from the academia world who came out and talked to us about things. And so I'll gladly talk to you more about that at a later time.
Thanks.
Thank you. Supervisor Tissier.
Just a quick question, because I'm not sure I understand what this is. You, under your highlights, you said you create a new military diversion caseload. I don't know what you mean.
Well, it's Veterans Court. We've worked, so what we're trying to do is provide a caseload that's focused primarily on veterans and have an opportunity to provide services in a uniquely, systematic fashion that it really recognizes their individual needs, understands kind of how they come to our experience, and recognize that, quite frankly, they should be treated with a level of respect and dignity accordingly to the things and the sacrifices they've made. And
so these are adults we're talking
yes, these
about.
are
Okay,
adults.
that's what okay. All right, thank you.
I have one question and one story to tell you. So I'm curious about when you were talking about the difficulty in recruitment. Have people given you the cost of housing as a reason they won't come to work here?
Definitely. I mean, I think housing, honestly, is one of those things that doesn't always have to come directly from the person's mouth, but you can look at the individuals that oftentimes make tremendous sacrifices to even apply for jobs to come this way. I don't have to do anything further than look at my own staff, most of which, quite frankly, at this point, live 20, 30, 40 miles outside of our county. So I think it's one of those issues that is oftentimes not spoken but doesn't need to be. We recognize that as part of the recruitment challenges.
Thank you. Now for the story. We have a San Mateo County Poet Laureate, and the Poet Laureate has events throughout the county throughout the year. The last one was this past Saturday at the Woodside Library, and the tagline was "Poetry is Nature." We had some 300 submissions from folks all over the county, a lot of kids, and at the event on Saturday, we selected certain poems to be read. One of the surprises that revealed itself there were 3 young men from Camp Glenwood who had written poems, not traditional poems, but poems in their voice, who came there to this event at the library and stood up and read their poems. The poems blew everybody away. They were awesome. And I think those young men were so proud. We were taking pictures and shaking hands and slapping the backs of one another and so forth and so on. But it was really inspirational to hear and meet those 3 young men from Camp Glenwood who actually wrote poetry. And I don't know how they got there. There was a supervisor, of course, with them. But I just wanted to share that story with you.
I appreciate that very much. I think what you see in that is the fact that most of our young people are incredible. They just need someone to remind them of such. And we have had opportunities in both the camps as well as in the institutions now to really identify the fact that a lot of our young people are just found themselves in difficult situations, but they are creative and intelligent and have vision and dreams. And I think what you saw in that is what we've seen also in other programs. You've heard me talk about the fact that last year we were able to provide college courses for a few of our young people. And our young people completely blew the professors out the water because they performed better than kids that were actually in the community. And they actually didn't believe that our kids were inside the facility. They said, well, you guys are trying to pull the wool over our eyes. These kids are not locked up. And we're like, no, they are. And I think what you see there, and we've also seen that when we've done graduation ceremonies, and you see the young people stand up and they speak and give their speeches no different than they would if they walked across the stage in a traditional high school. It clearly demonstrates that with the right support, our young people can flourish. And so thank you so much for sharing that, because I think that really, at the end of the day, is what we're about. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Nope. Thank you, Chief. Good
Thank you so
report.
much.
Thank you for your work. We'll move on to item number B3, which is the coroner, Mr. Robert Forecroft. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. President Slocum, members of the board, Mr. Callaghy, Mr. Jensen, Mr. Byers. The mission of the coroner's office is to independently investigate cause and manner of death on all of our unnatural and natural cases, and keeping in mind the legal requirements and the needs of the families of the survivors that we serve. Our cost per investigation remains a little bit over $1,300, which is within target levels. And 86% of the cases that we investigate, we close within 45 days, thanks to the great work of the coroner's office staff. We continue to meet our performance goals within the limits. Percentage of survivors that rate our service as good or better are 90%. Again, I contribute that to the great work of the men and women of the coroner's office, which I'll talk a little bit more in our highlights. Our case per capita remains an acceptable level and below target. And this is something to be very proud of. 100% of the coroner's office employees rate working in San Mateo County as good and better. And I believe that's contributed to the great management of the coroner's office. We're going through a lot of changes, legal requirements, and doing work a little differently than we've done in the past. And with all those things that are put on the employees, they still rate working in San Mateo County as good or better. And I think that's a great thing for the county of San Mateo. Our highlights, by 84%, we close our cases within 45 days, and that's start to finish. That's the start of the investigation until all of our final reports are done. The national average is 90 days, and we do it in half the time as a standard. And that benefits the families because their insurance benefits that they need to get resolved, and a lot of times they are waiting for our final reports. And the customer service ratings of the people that we serve, the families that we serve, remain at 90% or higher, and that's a great representation of the office. And it's refreshing while I'm out in public that I hear all the great work that the men and women of the coroner's office do. I hear it at the grocery store. I hear it when I go to city council meetings. I hear it from police departments. So it's great and it's refreshing to hear those comments about the staff. We're going to continue to administer our Save a Life program. That is something that we started back in 2010. We've served over 600 youth that have been sentenced by the juvenile court judge and probation officers to come through our program. And we're going to continue to participate in the sober proms that we go out to the high schools, and we participate with the law enforcement agencies on staging traffic accidents during prom time with a fatality. Our goals for 2017-2019 is to expand our Save a Life program. That is, right now we continue to do the sentenced youth. We want to expand that program and bring it out to the public. Michelle Duran went through that program last month, and she's going to give us some marketing strategies so we can bring that out to people that aren't sentenced. Maybe we get to the schools or to like SAL programs or the police athletic programs. We just started to begin another certification process of training, and that's the American Board of Medical Death Investigators. There's a lot of focus on coroners work now nationally and state levels. We had an increase in legislative bills this year than we've had in the past, so there's more eyes looking at what we do. And one of the things that the National Institution of Justice is going to do is require certification of the American Board. We were starting that process before they actually make it a requirement. And we're because the laws are changing, we're going to develop a program that we can go out and do briefings with the local law enforcement agencies and keep them up to date on what laws are changing in the coroner's office. Our challenges is to increase our customer survey responses. It's kind of hard to ask a family member to rate our services after a very tragic event. We're increasing that when we send out sending out the surveys we have it online now, we have it in our email, and when we send out reports, we have a survey with them so they can rate it. So those are 2 or 3 things that we're going to do to increase getting those surveys back. And to streamline the efficiency of the organization, we're moving some clerical responsibilities over to the investigators, which will streamline the entire case investigation. And for over the next 2 years, my chief deputy and I have developed a succession plan to address the key positions in the organization. I'd just like to thank the board, the county manager's office, and my staff for the great work that they do so we can continue to provide an excellent service.
Thank you, Mr. Forcroft. Questions, comments? Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. President, we do have a public comment for this item
Okay.
from Martin Fox.
Okay.
Good morning again, President Slocum and members of the board, Mr. Callagay, Mrs. Jensen, and Mr. Byers. Thank you for your service to the county. And thank you, Mr. Coroner, for your service to the county now and over the upcoming year. Please compile the number of deaths resulting from the use of opium and opium-like drugs, including morphine, OxyContin, and heroin, if the adult use of what is euphemistically called recreational marijuana is legalized. After Colorado legalized marijuana use by adults in 2012, the Mexican drug cartels experienced a 40% drop in marijuana sales. They turned to producing a purified form of heroin more cheaply than East Asian producers. The more potent and cheaper heroin caught pill users and even heroin addicts by surprise. Overdose deaths have skyrocketed, more than doubling from 2000 to 2014. Over 47,000 people died from drug overdoses in 2014, more than in any other year in American history. That's 125 people a day, more than 5 lives every hour, a fatality level that matched the AIDS epidemic in 1995. If the adult use of what is euphemistically called recreational marijuana is legalized, then its proponents will need to be identified for the sufferings and deaths that they have produced, and maybe, just maybe, knowing the number of deaths resulting from the use of opium and opium-like drugs will help repeal the legalization of adult use of recreational marijuana. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fox. Is that the last public speaker on that item? Okay, thank you. We'll move to our 9:30 item now, which is an introduction of an ordinance establishing a 5-year living wage pilot program for service contracts entered into by the county, and waive the reading of the ordinance in its entirety. Supervisor Groom.
Very much, Mr. President. I want to make a couple of brief comments before I turn it over to the staff. The evolution of the livable wage began a couple of years ago when Supervisor Horsley and I, along with then Assistant County Manager Mary McMillan, convened a group of not-for-profits to talk to them about the difficulties and the positives that they had doing business in our county and with our county. And a number of things came out of that, mainly administrative, which we were able to help make some changes, including quarterly payments, including multiple reports being done one time, and those didn't have to be submitted every month. They could be submitted on a quarterly basis or as the progress dictated. We also had a long conversation during that period about wages and how very difficult it is, as we know, for people to continue to live in this county, continue to stay in their home, continue to purchase a home, or even to pay the rent necessarily. And so one of the things that came out of this, after a lot of study and talking to people and research, was perhaps starting to the discussions on whether San Mateo County should have a livable wage for those not-for-profits and others who contract with us. And so that conversation began with our staff, and I want to especially say thank you to Jessica Mullen and Mary Claire Katz and Danielle Lee and Heather Ledesco for the amazing amount of research and study they did all over the state of California, so that when we started working on this, we would really know what was existing, why it existed, what had worked, and what hadn't worked over the years. So then the second thing we did was convene a stakeholders group of about 12 people. We met 6 or 7 times, and we used that basic research to begin to formulate what you're going to hear about today. Supervisor Pine was my partner in this, and we think that we have come up with a really good proposal for our not-for-profits and for this county. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Peggy, and then she will begin the formal presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Good. Good morning, Supervisor Slocum, members of the board, and my colleagues. As Supervisor Groom said, we are here this morning to present the results to your board of the work done by the subcommittee, Supervisor Pine and Supervisor Groom, the Living Wage Subcommittee. To provide support to that subcommittee, we convene a multi-department team because this is a multifaceted issue. We had staff from County Council, including John Niblin, Amy Armsby, and Maggie Tides. As Supervisor Groom mentioned, we had 4 staff from the Livable Communities Division of our Office of Sustainability, and we were also provided support by fiscal experts and purchasing experts. Gina Wilson, who oversees the health system's finances, was on our group, along with Robert Mankia from the Human Services Agency and Nicole McKay from Human Resources, the current purchasing director. So what we're going to do this morning is give you an overview of the detailed report that was attached to your agenda packet, outlining what the subcommittee worked on, and then we are going to present to you the proposed ordinance that has been put together by the subcommittee. With that, I'll turn it over to Chief Deputy County Counsel John Niblin.
Thank you, and good morning, Honorable Board, and everyone else present. So I was going to start with just a real brief kind of a discussion of sort of the source of power that we're acting under when we adopt a living wage ordinance like this. But before I did that, I wanted to just take a couple of seconds to introduce a couple of my colleagues. You, of course, know Amy. She's been with us a long time and has worked on some very high impact things here. So we've really benefited from having her kind of take the laboring oar and sort of spearhead this thing. But in addition, Maggie Tides is our second Michael Murphy Fellow. As you know, when you authorized the Michael Murphy Fellowship, this was something that was set up in memory of our late former county council, Michael Murphy. And one of the reasons for a couple of reasons for the fellowship was to, one, give a new law graduate, somebody who wouldn't normally have the experience that we'd be looking for when we're hiring a deputy, but give a new law graduate the opportunity to do high-impact public interest work with our office. And Maggie has fit the bill to a T. She's a recent Bolt graduate and has hit the ground running on this. So we're really grateful for her contributions here. And she'll speak a little bit to some aspects of the ordinance as we move along. But what I wanted to do, again, is sort of highlight the fact that here we're acting as a market participant. We're using our power as a contracting agency, as a market participant to essentially regulate in this area. This isn't really our police power that we're drawing from. It's, again, our market participant power. And what we do here is, by contract, we require service providers to pay a set wage that's above the state minimum wage or the federal minimum wage. As you know, the state minimum wage is currently $10 an hour. In January, it'll be $10.50. It'll eventually work its way up to $15 an hour. But we're talking about a wage for those providing services under certain kinds of contracts. Folks who work for those contract providers are going to be required to pay a wage higher than otherwise required under state law. So this is not a local minimum wage. It's one thing that we sort of discussed when we were last here for a study session. It's not a local minimum wage. It will only affect certain categories of employees working for contractors who provide services for the county. So just wanted to set that context before we sort of launch into sort of more detailed analysis.
I'm going to go over the living wage ordinance development timeline. I'll also discuss who is on the work group and a more detailed process overview of what the work group did. So first, as Supervisor Groom mentioned, in December 2015, the Board of Supervisors held a study session on the living wage ordinance, and during this study session, County Council and the County Manager's Office presented on common components of living wage ordinance, as well as a comparison of ordinances across California. At this study session, the board appointed Supervisors Carol Groom and Dave Pine to a living wage subcommittee and asked them to study living wage options and to report back to the board with recommendations. In January 2016, the Living Wage Ordinance Work Group was formed, and from March until May, the work group met 6 times. At the final work group meeting, there were 2 living wage ordinance drafts presented, one from the board subcommittee and one from a smaller group of nonprofits in the work group, as well as the Labor Council. This led to the county meeting to discuss the alternate draft proposal with labor in June and the subset of nonprofits in July and August. And finally, from August to September, the county reviewed the information given by labor and the nonprofits, and from September to October, the county's living wage ordinance was drafted. Here's all of the members of the Living Wage Ordinance Work Group. It included representatives from 9 nonprofit county contractors, 1 large for-profit contractor, and the San Mateo County Labor Council. County staff that participated in the Living Wage Ordinance Steering Committee included representatives from the Board of Supervisors, the County Manager's Office, County Council, the Office of Sustainability, the Health System, the Human Services Agency, and the Purchasing Division. So now I'll go into a little bit more detail about the work group process. The first meeting on March 7th, the work group went over its role, an overview of the definition of a living wage, as well as a review of common components of ordinances in other counties in California. At the following 2 meetings, the work group discussed how a living wage ordinance would impact their organizations at different wage rates, and these concerns will be addressed later in the presentation in more detail. There was also a panel discussion with representatives from nonprofit organizations, as well as staff involved in the implementation of San Francisco's living wage ordinance, which is, they refer to it as a minimum compensation ordinance, but it functions the same as a living wage ordinance. During this group of meetings, a survey was also distributed to get specific data on the fiscal impacts of an ordinance for these different agencies as part of the work group, and it also asked for how it would affect them at 3 different wage rates. In the final 3 meetings, we went over the results of the work group survey. We also decided to do an overview of the new California minimum wage, which was signed into legislation during these meetings, so it seemed important to include that information. We discussed the initial county proposed criteria for a living wage ordinance, and finally, we presented a draft proposal for a San Mateo County living wage ordinance. During this last meeting on May 16th, an alternative proposal was presented by representatives from these 5, from a subgroup of nonprofit organizations within the larger work group, as well as the Labor Council for consideration by the entire work group. Both of these proposals were discussed, and it was at this point that there was an agreement that county staff would reach out to that subset of work group members who had some reservations about the county's proposal to discuss ways to address their concerns and incorporate solutions into the final living wage ordinance proposal. So, with all of this information and with the subsequent meeting with labor and with a smaller group of nonprofits, the county drafted a living wage ordinance proposal. And with that, I'll hand it over to Peggy to discuss major themes addressed during the work group meetings.
So from the work group discussions, two major themes. A group around positive advantages of doing a living wage ordinance came forward, and also some concerns around the potential costs. So in terms of the advantages, like all employers in San Mateo County, nonprofit agencies are feeling pressure from the housing costs. And having higher wages for their staff would be very desirable. They feel it would be hopefully allow them to recruit the kind of staff that they would like to keep and retain. They also felt it would boost morale of their own staff. It's a statement about the value of the work that they do for our community. In terms of the concerns, there were two categories, four key issues, but one was primarily revenue. And it had to do with their concern about the county not covering the full agency cost of implementing a living wage ordinance. What the organizations talked about was the fact that what they referred to is their funding sources are braided. They have multiple strands of funding. For a single program, they might get money from the federal government, they might get money from the state government, they might get money from a foundation, and the county might provide also a share of funding for a specific program. Their concern was that even though the county was promising to cover the costs associated with their portion of the program, that those other agencies, those other funding sources, would not pick up those costs. So braided funding was a primary concern. On the revenue side, they also mentioned that fundraising is particularly difficult for administrative costs or for costs that aren't specifically outcome related. And they considered an increase of salaries as not something they'd be able to easily sell to their outside funders. And then finally, in terms of costs, additional costs associated with living wage ordinance, they had two specific concerns. One was related to what they called vertical compaction, and that relates to the fact that when you raise the salary of the lowest level of employee, that means that their salary is going to be closer to their supervisor's salary, and that means you probably have to raise salaries up the ladder, if you will, within that organization. So that was considered vertical compaction cost concerns. They also had what we started to refer to as horizontal salary compaction concerns. Their thought was that they may have a group of staff that work exclusively on county programs, but they might also have another group of staff that are funded by another organization, say the federal government or the state government. And their concern in terms of horizontal compaction is people doing the same type of work need to be paid the same amount of money, even though they may not have the same source of funding covering their salaries. So those were the concerns about vertical and horizontal compaction. And then finally, all of the work group participants were concerned about a living wage ordinance adding additional complexity to their administrative costs. They didn't want something that would add additional costs that they actually currently have trouble funding right now in terms of administration and fiscal and support staff. So those are the primary concerns that came out of the work group. Next, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Amy Armsby, who is going to share with you the components of the living wage ordinance that was proposed by this subcommittee. But I want to emphasize the concerns that I just went over were thought through long and hard by the subcommittee, by staff, and our hope and goal was to develop a living wage ordinance that addressed these issues.
Good morning, Good morning, honorable supervisors. And it has really been interesting and challenging and really, I think, important work to be involved in this effort. I want to just walk you through the key points of the ordinance, which I will start with the fact that it's a 5-year pilot program with what we call a hard sunset. And what that means is it's a defined period of time that this program, this proposed ordinance would be in effect. Beginning January 1st of 2017, that would be the effective date of the ordinance, and sunsetting on December 31st of 2021. And the significance of that is that in order to continue the program or implement a new program, there would have to be a public hearing and board action for anything beyond December 31st of 2021. And the reason for having it as a pilot program is both to allow the phase-in of the program so that it doesn't have a dramatic impact on the contractors who are affected by it, The ordinance itself starts at the current wage, minimum wage of $10.50 an hour, assumes the current wage of $10 an hour, and for January 1st of 2017, it'll be $10.50 an hour, and sets benchmarks that get us to $17 an hour in 3.5 years. And I'm going to go through that schedule in just a minute. But the idea would be that the increases would go to $17 an hour, and then in fixed amounts. And then after hitting $17 an hour, they would increase for the remainder of the pilot period in an amount equivalent to the then current CPIU. That's the Consumer Price Index for this geographic region. Now, as I noted, the Board of Supervisors could decide to extend the program, but as it is being proposed, it would have a hard sunset date of December 31st of 2021. The board would have, under the proposed ordinance, discretion to terminate the ordinance in the event that economic conditions called for it, much the same as or very similar to the off-ramps that are available to the state for the state minimum wage that has been currently put into effect and gets the state minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2020. There are some exceptions to what employees are required to be paid in accordance with the minimum wage ordinance, and those are listed within the ordinance as individual categories. Some of them include library aides, franchisees, student interns, in other words, students performing work for a contractor for academic credit, and some other similar exceptions. The living wage ordinance as proposed would apply to all new contracts for which the term begins on or after April 1st of 2017. So the effective date of the ordinance is January 1st, 2017, but it became clear that because there's a negotiation period and often, in fact, usually an RFP period, there needed to be some lead-in time. RFPs that go out would need to indicate the impact of the living wage ordinance and allow contractors to build those costs of implementing the living wage ordinance into their contract negotiations. And so in order to do that, the decision was made that new contracts with terms that begin on or after April 1st of 2017 would be required to comply. Existing contracts that are currently in effect when the living wage ordinance would go into effect on January 1st, 2017, would not be impacted by the living wage ordinance. If they were amended to either extend their term or increase the value of the contract or both over $25,000, they would then also need to be subject. The amended contracts would need to be subject to the living wage ordinance. And there are various reasons why we can't apply a new law to an existing contract. It's a constitutional problem, first of all, but we also wanted to allow for the possibility that some not-for-profits may wish to implement the living wage ordinance sooner than April 1st of 2017, and they can do that if they wish. They can do that by voluntarily entering into an amendment to their agreements in order to subject them to the living wage ordinance. And they can do that in exchange for a program that the county is proposing that would offer an enhancement, and that would be a payment to not-for-profits to offset the cost of implementing the living wage ordinance. And Maggie, my colleague Maggie Tides, is going to talk about that in a little more detail in a minute. But it adds to the phasing in of the living wage ordinance. So the idea is that new contracts entered into on or after April 1st that are being negotiated would need to, the contractors would need to build in whatever additional costs are required in order to pay salaries or pay wages in accordance with the living wage ordinance into their negotiations. And so those costs would, in that fashion, be passed to the county as a contracting entity. So this is the schedule by which the increases would be proposed under the ordinance. And you can see January 1st of 2017, the county living wage ordinance wage would go to $14 an hour. That would be an increase over the current minimum wage, or the then current minimum wage, of $3.50 an hour. The reality is, from talking to our group of nonprofits that were part of the work group, we were informed that the $14 an hour would impact relatively none of their employees, that for the most part, they're already paying employees $14 an hour or more. But this is the beginning point for our ordinance, and then on July 1st of 2017, it would go to $15 an hour, and July 1st of 2018, et cetera, until you get to July 1st of 2020, which, as I referenced earlier, would increase in accordance with the CPIU that's then current. I just want to note we're using sort of a stand-in for the CPIU. That 51-cent increase is not necessarily precisely what it would be, but that gives you an idea of the continued increase. The proposed living wage ordinance covers contracts with the county for services, so not contracts for goods. There are some exceptions to who it constitutes a covered contractor. Nonprofits are generally considered covered contractors. There is, as I noted earlier, an enhancement payment that's available to nonprofits, but only nonprofits whose contracts are more than 50% funded by the county. So if the bulk of the funding for the contract comes from a source other than the county, then the county's enhancement program does not apply to the nonprofit contract involved. There's also a definition of covered employees that is pretty broad under our proposed ordinance. Full and part-time employees working directly on county contracts. The exceptions for covered employees include, as I noted before, library and park aides, election day workers, students working for academic credit, seasonal employees, and some other categories. Other government entities are not covered, so when the county enters into an agreement with another government entity, they would not be subject to the living wage ordinance. The implementation timeline, I talked about it a little bit, but it allows for what we describe as kind of a phase-in period. And this chart just sort of lays out how it applies to various types of contractors. If a contractor, a for-profit contractor, has a contract that's already in effect, that's already been entered into as of January 1st, 2017, they are not required to comply with the living wage ordinance as to that existing contract. For a nonprofit who has a contract that exists as of January 1st of 2017, they are not required to comply either, but if they choose to comply, in order to receive the enhancement payment to assist them with to offset the cost of implementing the living wage and ramping up their salaries, they may voluntarily amend their agreements and receive that enhancement payment. And again, Maggie's going to tell you, give you some more detail about the enhancement payment program that's being proposed. If there's a contract that is existing as of January 1st of 2017, but is amended to increase either the value of the contract or the term, the length of the term, on or after January 1st of 2017, then that contract, in addition to extending the term and adding money to the contract, will also require that the contract be subject to the living wage ordinance. And the living wage ordinance will, contractors will indicate their compliance with the living wage ordinance in much the same way that we currently have language in our contracts about the jury service ordinance and equal benefits, they will certify using specific language dictated in the ordinance that they are in compliance and will be in compliance with the living wage ordinance for the term of the contract. That gives the county the ability then to enforce it using a breach of contract claim against the contractor. So if the contractor fails to comply, they are in breach of the contract. So, and as I said earlier, new contracts entered into as of April 1st, on or after April 1st of 2017, will be subject to the living wage ordinance, unless they are subject to one of the exceptions. So I'm going to turn it over to Maggie, and she's going to walk you through the enhancement program and the enforcement mechanisms that are in the agreement.
Amy, if I may, just a quick clarification for the benefit of the board.
Yes.
I think you indicated that after the hard sunset in 2021, that the board could extend,
Yes.
or could choose not to extend for economic reasons. But I think it's also
No,
true.
I'm sorry, John. I misspoke if that's what I said. The ordinance could be shortened. The ordinance could be terminated early if there is within the discretion of the board, if there are economic reasons to do that. There are off-ramps in the ordinance that are similar to the governor's plan for raising the minimum wage that allow, under certain conditions, really just within the discretion of the board, for the board to make a decision to shorten the length of the pilot. That's what I meant to say. But the pilot itself has a hard sunset at the end of the 5-year period. And in order to extend or continue the program, it would require board a public hearing and
Right,
board
and of
action.
course, they could exercise within their broad discretion to not extend for a number of reasons that might make sense at that time.
And exactly, and even with no action, it would just end.
Right.
Yeah. Thanks.
Can I ask a quick question on that note? If the board decided not to continue with it after it sunsets, would it go backwards into time financially as far as what is being paid, or would they end at that $17 an hour?
Well, the reality is
Or wherever
they
are
would
at
no
that time?
longer be compelled by the ordinance to pay a $17 an hour, let's say, minimum amount. It is highly unusual. It would be highly unusual for salaries to be reduced, but I suppose it would be possible. They could be reduced down to the minimum wage, which at that point would be $15 an hour. So that would be legally allowable. I think it's unlikely, but it is possible.
I guess the concern I have is if that were to happen, you've got these nonprofits that are paying these wages, and then all of a sudden, if the county decides economically they can't afford it, then those nonprofits are paying a high rate, and now do they have to now tell their employees we're taking $2 an hour away from you? I mean, I suppose that could happen. Am I understanding this
At
correctly?
that juncture, those nonprofits will have negotiated, presumably with the county, compensation in any contracts existing at that time that reflects their personnel costs.
So I think the expectation would be that as new contracts are negotiated, we certainly would expect the contractors, including nonprofits, to build those costs into the proposal that they then present to the county for how much it will cost to provide the services that the county is seeking. So the assumption would be that those not-for-profits and for-profits would have built those costs into their agreements, and that if for some reason the ordinance were to if once the hard sunset goes in place, if there is no extension, that the funding would already be in place to continue to pay the $17 an hour. I mean, there would be, as you pointed out, there wouldn't be a legal compulsion to pay $17 an hour, but I think it would be unlikely for those salaries to go down, particularly if contracts were in place already that assumed the payment of the $17 an hour. Does that make sense?
This is not in the ordinance, Supervisor Tissier, but I think what we will do is have periodic check-ins with the group that was on the subcommittee and any other not-for-profit that wants to check in with us, and monitor this very carefully and see, and at year 4, see where we are, and maybe perhaps even reconvene the group and talk about it. Because we don't want that to happen, but contractually, it could.
That's right, and we do have annual reports built into the the ordinance, which we've not been very specific about, but that would be one of the expected.
I think we'll be taking the temperature on a regular basis.
Good morning. I'm Maggie Tides. I'd like to briefly thank you for approving the Michael P. Murphy Fellowship. As Mr. Niblin said, I recently graduated from Bolt Hall, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of the San Mateo County Council's office and to get to work on the living wage ordinance. So thank you. I'm going to address a few important aspects of the living wage ordinance. The first of which, as Amy referred to, is called enhancements. There we go. Okay. So an enhancement is a payment from the county to nonprofit organizations that voluntarily choose to comply with the living wage ordinance before the mandated date. So that would be before April 1st, 2017, or before the end of their existing contract. This is a provision that is unique to San Mateo County, and it facilitates and hopefully expedites the transition to compliance with the living wage ordinance. Again, as Peggy referred to some of the concerns, this was meant to address some of the concerns about recruitment and retention and hopefully allow nonprofits to boost their wages before compliance would be mandated. So in order to receive an enhancement, a nonprofit, again, as Amy said, would need to be receiving at least 50% of funding from the county. The nonprofit would need to amend an existing contract to comply with the living wage ordinance, and then the nonprofit would automatically receive this enhancement, which ranges from 0.5% to 1.5% according to a schedule, and they would receive that annually for the life of the existing contract, prorated if applicable. So there are a few other important aspects of the living wage ordinance. One of those is enforcement. So how enforcement will be affected is through standard contract language that would give rise to a breach of contract action if necessary. The county also maintains the power to audit, and we've provided for that in the ordinance. And in addition, employees must be notified of their rights under this ordinance, and they may submit grievances, and there's a grievance process provided for. In addition, the board has the power to grant exemptions or waivers to exempt certain organizations from compliance with this ordinance, and the board also maintains the power to suspend the pilot program at its discretion. In addition, there will be reporting requirements that will provide metrics for evaluating the effectiveness of the living wage ordinance throughout its pilot program. And I will turn it over to Peggy.
Thank you, Maggie. I'd just like to sum up the response that the living wage ordinance makes to the complaints or the concerns that were raised by the work group. First of all, by phasing in, as both Amy and Maggie have mentioned, we're allowing the nonprofits and all of our contractors to plan for these salary increases. As Amy noted, most folks pay $15 an hour with benefits to their staff, our nonprofit contractors, and many of them are up close to $17 an hour. So it's 17 where the cost will start incurring, and that would be 2 years out in terms of our implementation scale. By applying the living wage ordinance to new and renegotiated contracts, mandatory compliance only for new and renegotiated contracts, that allows, again, this time to plan and also to present in your new bid for work the costs associated with this. We mentioned that to deal with this braided funded issue, contracts that provide less than 50% of a program, program support would not be required to comply. And that we talked about the enhancement payments, which would be available for people who wanted to initiate this early. And finally, if there was a serious problem, the board can issue exemptions to any contractor they choose to do. So, and then the key point, I think, is that this is a pilot project. This is something that we want to test to see how it works and how it goes forward. So in terms of the costs, I want to emphasize that these are estimated costs. One of the things that our new countywide contract management system will provide us with is better detail on contract costs, better costs across all of our providers and all of our departments. But based upon the data provided by the work group participants, that where they calculated for us their costs, their estimated cost of implementing a living wage ordinance, we came up with a dollar amount of around $4.2 million. That includes a reserve amount, an additional amount beyond what they told us, what they estimated, because that was one of the requests from the nonprofits that we met with this summer. And what we would do if your board chooses to implement this ordinance would be bring back in the budget for fiscal years 17-19 an appropriation to cover this amount of funding. We would also, as Maggie said, report annually on the costs and be able to adjust as needed as we go forward. So with that, our presentation is concluded, and staff would be happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Thank you, Ms. Jensen. Supervisor Groom.
Thank you. Let me just close up on behalf of Supervisor Pine and me and our staffs, Randy and Ricky, who did so much additional work on this. We really value the employees who do the work that we contract with not-for-profits to perform necessary county services. The bulk of those probably are in the Human Services Agency and the health agencies. As you know, most of our alcohol and rehab is provided by contractors. We want to keep those people. We want to keep those employees, some who live here, some who do not live here. But we have found over the years, and I think you heard today in the earlier presentations from our especially from Ileana, the great work that is done in this county, and much of it is done by our contract agencies, and it's so essential that we pay a living wage so that they can retain their employees and be able to recruit new employees. And so this is really the genesis for this work, the value of our not-for-profits in San Mateo County, the work they do, and that retention and new hiring is so important. Thanks, Mr. President.
Thank you, Supervisor Groom. Supervisor Horsley.
Well, I concur with Supervisor Groom said about the staff for all of our nonprofits. You really do have to be compassionate and caring to perform the work that they do, and they do outstanding work. I just have a couple of questions. Did we ever do an analysis? I've heard, I don't know if this is true or not, but I've heard that when you raise wages for some staff, that some people have some of their benefits like CalFresh, and they might also be collecting SSI, and that their benefits then end up going down. The federal benefits go down as this wage increase goes up. Did we ever do an analysis of that?
Is Robert here in the room? No. Yes, we did do detailed analysis of that. Robert Mankia from the Human Service Agency prepared a very detailed sheet that was shared with the work group. They do go down, but it was more as the family size got larger, as I recalled, and that was the issue. And honestly, our hope is that staff do not have to rely on safety net services.
Okay, and then the cost is $4.2 million annually or over 2 years?
For 2 years. That would be the amount that we'd bring back for 17-19. It will go up as the living wage goes up because it will be more expensive, particularly if there is a continued increase over time. But we think that $4.2 million should be adequate to cover the 17-19 fiscal year.
Okay. I was a little surprised that the start is at $14 an hour, especially when you've indicated that so many of the agencies already pay higher than that, although I do see that it goes up by July 1st to $15. Okay, that's all. Really, no other questions.
If I may, I just want to make one clarification. One of the things that was mentioned was that this wouldn't apply to what sounded like some county staff, park aides or library aides. The ordinance evolved and went through many iterations, and we have decided at the recommendation of Supervisor Groom to not include county employees in this ordinance. We plan to come back at a future date with a salary ordinance relating to those employees. So this is only for county contractor employees.
Thank you. Supervisor Tissier.
Just a quick question. Peggy, the last slide you had sort of responded to the concerns of some of the nonprofits and maybe labor. When you talked about those responses and to those concerns, are those groups now comfortable that this is going to work for them?
We've had multiple conversations, and the two organizations that had the greatest concerns were Samaritan House and Life Moves. I met personally with both Bart Chalo and with Bruce Ives. We sent them the report prior to public distribution, and I heard back from both of them that they are supportive of the work that we've done. What we realize is that there will be details that need to be worked out, and I have guaranteed both of them and the rest of our work group and anyone else who we feel we need to work with, is that we will work with them on those specific issues. Okay. So I think that people are positive at this point. And Supervisor Groom, you might want to.
Yeah, I think that's true. You know, clearly this was new territory. Well, we did have reports from various other counties in the state that have done this. It still was new territory, and there were some ups and downs. And but I think that the group was so collegial that we were able to work them out. And I as I said, because we made it a pilot program, we can continue to adjust. And if we choose to reintroduce the pilot at the end of the 5 years, I suspect we will make changes.
Can I have one other question? On the exceptions, you know, I did speak to Chip Huggins from Kaminar. He was really concerned about, they hire a number of their former clients who do get SSI, and his concern was that by the $14, $15, I'm not sure if it's $14, $15, or $16 an hour, but it had a negative impact on their SSI. Is it possible, and when we talk about exceptions, that there's, you know, as we are working out the kinks in the system, that we can grant exceptions to certain classes of employees, such as, you know, identified by, say, for example, Kaminar?
I will defer to counsel on this, but my understanding is that the exemptions do not apply to certain classes of employees, but they do apply to specific contracts. So if there were situations that you wanted to exempt a contract for a specific reason, that would be...
We could do it?
Yes. You could do that.
Okay.
The exemptions there are some specific exemptions sort of outlined, but they aren't exclusive. It's including but not limited to. So.
Okay.
That's correct. There's a catch-all that would allow, on a case-by-case basis, for carving out situations like that.
Good. Thank you.
I might have missed this in the presentation, but is there a cost of administering this program? And was that included in the $4.2 million, or is that cost of administration to do these inspections and audits something separate?
Our goal in setting up the program was to make it as cost-effective as possible. And there is no cost for administration because we feel it will be fairly simple. As was explained, the contractors will simply have to check a box to say that they are complying with the minimum wage requirement that will be incorporated into all of our contracts. In terms of follow-up, John, do you want to talk about that, if there are complaints?
Sure. There are in the ordinance a couple of enforcement mechanisms, and a lot of them do rely on the contractor employees themselves highlighting or identifying issues. There's a notification process that's integrated into the ordinance whereby contractor employers have to let employees know about the ordinance in cases where it applies. There's a grievance process that's built in whereby an employee can bring a matter to the attention of the county. And there's also a judicial remedy that's built into the ordinance that provides for attorney's fees, which again is oftentimes effective in situations like that when, you know, folks know that their attorney's fees are going to get paid. So we feel like we've addressed those matters fairly comprehensively.
Thank you. Yep. Just one other question, if I could, Supervisor Groom. When you all worked on the plastic bag ban, I think some time ago, that ordinance became a model ordinance for cities to adopt. Have you given thought to this item being a model ordinance for cities, or?
I have, we have. We didn't really talk about it, but I have other city council people have called and asked about it. And then, of course, the city of San Mateo just recently enacted a minimum wage that's higher than the state. Mm-hmm. So I suspect that cities will be taking a look at all of those kinds of things.
Very good. Thank you. Public If that's the extent of the questions by the board members and comments, we'll move to public comment.
Yes, we have 3 comment cards, the first of which is from Bradley Cleveland, followed by Raina Lehman.
Hi, I'm Bradley Cleveland with the San Mateo County Union Community Alliance, and I wanted to thank the Board of Supervisors for moving forward with this ordinance. It's really one of the chances to really help working families in the county, this and the minimum wage ordinance. And I also specifically want to appreciate the work of Supervisor Groom and Pine and county staff and their willingness to listen to our concerns. I'm with the Raise the Wage Coalition, which is labor unions, community organizations, and faith organizations that were working on these 2 issues. And specifically, one of the things that you all did was actually move forward, increase the time frame for raising the wage to $17, and we appreciate that, and also that you built in annual reviews as opposed to the end of the pilot period. And that allows you to actually look and tweak the ordinance to make sure it's working. So those are a couple of things. I do think that you all took on a really tough task of actually looking at the nonprofits. And a lot of the living wage ordinances actually focus on the for-profits. And it's been, as you know, it's a very difficult situation. But what we don't want to see is, as you're raising the wages, that it forces these nonprofits to cut services and staff in order to meet that. So it's really important that there's a commitment to allow the nonprofits to build the costs into their contracts as the wages go up. But as you move forward, we hope that you also start looking at the for-profit organizations and the terms for their staff and how they, what we want to see you all looking at raising the standards for the for-profits who may not have the same kind of pay and benefits as the nonprofits. So that's one thing as you move forward. We hope that is something that you look at. And again, thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Next, we have Raina Lehman, followed by Greg Brown.
Esteemed supervisors and staff, and on behalf of the San Mateo Labor Council, it's clear this county cares about people. The staff reports, the department reports that we just heard were pretty outstanding. And this is the next piece of the work that you can do to address the income inequality in our county. So the initial reaction, we're very excited about the prospect of extending living wages to the workers who are struggling to maintain. At $17 an hour, that's about $35,350 a year before taxes. It's a step. And we do look forward to working in partnership with you on the implementation of some of these technical pieces, including the enforcement, the penalties, and the exemptions. And clearly, as Bradley said, we do need to keep a focus on making sure that this is affordable for our nonprofits and that the living wage ordinance does not have any unintended consequences of cutting services or staff because of the costs. We're not looking forward to it sunsetting. We would want to work with you to make sure that this could go forward. There was, as part of the work group, I did receive these documents late last week and reviewed them, but there was a qualifier about 50% of the county contracting before it was the cost of the county before it was implemented. So that's something new that we didn't see in the document. So I don't know what the impacts of that are going to be, of that qualifier. And I got a little concerned about suspending the ordinance versus terminating it. I certainly understand that we would need off-ramps, and the annual review will allow us time to see what's going on, but I wouldn't want to think that the ordinance would just be terminated right in the middle. Suspending it, I could understand. So in short, Supervisors Pine and Groom for doing the heavy lifting of moving this forward for the whole board. Thanks for addressing, and thanks for your leadership. I think it's going to have great ripple effects with the rest of the cities in the county. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Lastly, we have Greg Brown.
My name is Greg Brown, and I'm with the International Association of Machinists.
I've had the privilege, quite frankly, several years ago, being assigned to a group of people that is 85% women and mostly minority. And I've learned a tremendous amount. And one of the things that I didn't realize is that how many women are single moms trying to, and there's even have a few guys that are being single parents that are trying to raise their kids. And of course, the problem is you're carrying it all by yourself because child support payment is often an issue. And the people don't give up. I was so impressed and I admire some of the people I've met, how hard they fight to take care of their kids, to raise their kids. And this doesn't sound like a lot, but every dollar counts. And this will help. If it helps 25 women in this county, you've made 25 women's lives a little bit easier. And it's amazing to me. People, they truly have, if you call it an American spirit, they truly want to do it, work hard, show their kids the right way to do things, and help their kids get ahead. And if maybe no matter how life comes out, they feel obligated and they're living up to every bit of their responsibility to try to raise those kids properly. And a living wage goes as a start, at least for some people, to help get there a little bit more. Puts a few more bucks in their pocket and they can count on. So I commend this board and staff for everything you've done. And like I said, every bit hurts and helps, And when you see this, to meet such remarkable people, it's an education. And it restores your faith totally in America and people who don't want to be on welfare. They're doing everything they can to do the right thing. So it's incredibly impressive. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Is that the last speaker?
Yes.
President Slocum, if I could, really quickly, we actually were just having a little sidebar on Ms. Lehman's comment. I was going to ask my colleague, Ms. Armsby, maybe just to speak to it. This is the 50% covered contract piece that I wanted to get clarified.
Thank you. So we, as you can probably tell, with all these moving parts to the ordinance, there were a lot of iterations, there was a lot of discussion, there was a lot of analysis involved. And where we landed for purposes of the proposed ordinance you have before you is the 50% funding issue. Contracts that are funded 50% or more by the county has to do with eligibility for the enhancement. As it's written now, the living wage ordinance would apply to all covered contracts, regardless of the amount of funding provided by the county. However, eligibility for the enhancement is triggered by 50% or more being funded by the county. So I just wanted to make that clear. That's what the current ordinance and the report reflects.
Mr. Slocum, I would like to make a motion introducing an ordinance establishing a 5-year living wage pilot program for service contracts entered into by the county and waive the reading of the ordinance in its entirety.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Let me just say a sincere thank you to Supervisor Groom and Supervisor Pine. When I read through this material, I thought the process that was used was really outstanding. I thought the staff report was really good, one of the best I've seen. And I would just like to, thank the county staff who were involved with this. It's not often that I thank the lawyers, but I think you all did a tremendous job here. And I know there was a great deal of work that went into this by a lot of people, and it's sincerely appreciated. And I think this is a bold step forward. I thank you for your leadership. Thank you. Okay.
I wish Supervisor Pine were here so that he could have enjoyed this conversation as well.
Thank you. Thank you all. Are you leaving? All right, we'll move on to item number 5, which is Measure A. A Measure A matter, and I guess, Mr. Callaghy, are you going to?
Mr. President, we have item 4.
Sorry. Oh, I skipped item 4. How did I do that? I'm very sorry. So item 4 is a presentation by NOVA on the transition of the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act program in San Mateo County. I'm sorry, I skipped it.
Good morning.
Morning.
So, good morning, President Slocum, honorable members of the board, Mrs. Jensen, Mr. Callaghy, and Mr. Byers. My name is Nicole Pollock, and I am the Assistant Director for the Human Services Agency and your former Director of the San Mateo County Workforce Investment Board. On January 27th, 2015, this board authorized combining local workforce investment areas and signed the Joint Powers Agreement to join the NOVA Consortium via Resolution 073599. State agencies and administration concurred with your recommendation and merged local workforce development planning regions with NOVA. This resulted in NOVA representing the interests of San Mateo County businesses and job seekers. Precipitating causes included the transition of the Workforce Investment Act to the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which emphasized regional planning, and also the shared job seekers, industries, and regional labor market needs between the Northern Silicon Valley and the County of San Mateo. I would like to thank the board for their thoughtfulness and support in coming up with this recommendation. And I would also like to introduce Chris Stadelman. She's the director of NOVA, and she will present on the progress and accomplishments since the transition to the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act and since joining the NOVA Consortium.
Good morning.
Sort of. Almost.
President Slocum, honorable members of the board, Mrs. Jensen, Mr. Callaghy, Mr. Byers. I promise I'll be brief. I know it's been a long morning. I really appreciate you taking a little bit of time on your very busy agenda to hear this update. So this is just to sort of give you a little bit of background. I'll only spend a few minutes on history, I promise, to explain how we got here. So as Nicole said, my name is Chris Stadelman. I'm the director of the NOVA Workforce Development Board. I've been there for about 7.5 years now. And if I may, I'd like to give a shout out to my newest board member, Roseanne Faust from San Cita. Okay, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act began on July 1, 2015. As Nicole said, it's really about creating a comprehensive regional system. And what comprehensive means is they really want the workforce areas to incorporate other programs that are involved in workforce preparation. So that would be TANF, adult education, community colleges, Department of Rehabilitation, and those are, as you can imagine, some of our target groups. We're really about closing the gap between labor supply and demand. That sounds like a big job. It is a big job. The vision of WIOA is huge. It's about bringing the system together, all of the resources together in a region to ensure that the workforce is prepared for exactly the demand of regional employers. I do want to mention that funding has been going down. Sometimes when Congress reauthorizes a new bill, they add appropriations. This time they did not. We've seen considerable cuts over the last 2 decades in employment and training. Another big change this year is the youth component. Under WIA, youth that were out of school, meaning not in high school, not working, not in college, you had to spend 25% of your resources, your youth allocation, on out-of-school youth. That requirement changed to 75%. That was a big shift, and nationally there's been a shift in the providers of services to youth because that's quite a high bar and a fairly different target group from what they were looking at before. Let's see. This is starts with a federal appropriation by Congress, goes as a block grant to the governor. It is administered by EDD. There is a state workforce board that provides the policy oversight and advice to the governor. And then by federal formula, the monies come down to the local workforce development boards, of which we now are that really large-looking region in blue, the northern end of Santa Clara County, all the way up to San Francisco. I do want to mention As I said, the funding's been cut. At the national level, this is under $3 billion at this point in time. And the calculation's been done that if this program was funded the way it was in the 80s, particularly under the Job Training Partnership Act, in 2016 dollars, it would be a $30 billion program. So that just gives you the scope of how we've shrunk over time. But we're still trying to be relevant, and I think still growing and learning in how best to meet employers' needs. This is the basic chronology. I won't spend any time on it. The important issues are that the Board of Supervisors passed a resolution to join the NOVA Consortium in January of 2015, and it became effective in July of 2015. There were really a lot of reasons that we looked at this as a positive. We have a long history, NOVA and San Mateo County, of partnering on projects, of being involved in regional initiatives together from both the workforce and the education perspective, and even labor has worked together in those two counties. So this really made a lot of sense. These are the jurisdictions that now belong to the NOVA Consortium. In size, it's about 42% Santa Clara County, 58% San Mateo County, and that would be in labor force and funding. The lead organization is the City of Sunnyvale by the Joint Powers Agreement. One of the strategic benefits in the combination is the size. Relatively, we were number 13 and number 17 out of 48 workforce boards in the state. Well, that was 49 then, when we were individual. And together, we're 7th in the state. And if you'll notice, the top 6 are all in Southern California. So by labor force size, that literally makes us the largest workforce area in Northern California, which does have its strategic advantages. It also means that we cover the full geography between San Jose and San Francisco. WIOA requires regional planning. Our region includes San Francisco, San Jose, and San Benito. Having us cover all of that geography between those two major cities gives us almost an equal seat at the table in negotiating regional projects, and it's speaking up for the demographics of our labor force and the needs of our employers. These are the goals that the board established for us, the NOVA Workforce Board, for the transition. We wanted to make sure that we pulled out the best in both programs. For example, San Mateo had an expertise in the very low-income adult. NOVA had an expertise, because of our region, in a professional and dislocated worker. Together, really, we can cover the full spectrum of need on the job seeker scale. It was also important that we not have any disruption in service, no impact on current services and customers. So as a result, we continued the contracts that were funded when San Mateo RFP'd their workforce programs in 2014. We didn't want any customers to get lost, in the cracks. We didn't want to have to stop and start services or change locations, so we continued those contracts. Those contracts will come up this year for new procurement, and we'll be making some changes in how that works. But up to now, there's been no disruption in services. We're proud of that. We used to have separate strategic plans and separate goals. We do not any longer. According to the state, we're one area. We're not a merged area, we're one workforce consortium. This is the year that we're working on a new local and regional strategic plans. We're providing a public comment period. We welcome your staff and yourselves, if you're interested, in reviewing those documents. We work closely with Nicole to provide her copies of everything that we put out there, including our memorandums of understanding, and we do have one with your Human Services Agency. We'll also be RFPing, again, doing procurement for service providers, and we would welcome readers and scorers from your county to ensure that whoever we hire is familiar with the county, with the needs, and can provide a high quality of service. There are some administrative advantages in joining together as a region. One is the strong administrative structure of the city of Sunnyvale, well known for solid administration, clean audits, good credit rating, all those things that when we apply for federal and other grants make a difference. Also, NOVA it's been designated by the state as a high-performing workforce board. That's a designation that requires exceeding performance measures and jumping through some hoops on the strategic plan. The increased size does make us more competitive to bring in money, and we've always had strong partnerships with education, with economic development. Thanks to Roseanne and other partners, we've been warmly welcomed into the business community in San Mateo County. I was given some advice by Nora Sobolov of JobTrain that it would be helpful for you to understand the scope of our funding challenges. You can see the current year allocation was cut $424,000. That's fairly common. This formula that directs the funding to us is very old. It's from the 70s, and it's based on poverty and unemployment. As you can imagine, we don't fare well on that scale. Since that formula was developed, and again remains unchanged, they've added work and responsibility to what we do, namely dislocated workers, of which we have a lot, even though we have a low unemployment rate. They did create a set-aside for the funding for the Secretary of Labor and for the governor to address dislocated workers, but they did not change the funding formula. The other thing they did was add the responsibility of a one-stop career service center in each local area to serve all job seekers and all employers, keeping in mind that population is not part of the formula. It's still poverty and unemployment rate. So by the labor force, NOVA receives $6.80 for every person in our labor force. The state average is $15.42. But even more dramatic, WARN notices. The numbers of individuals impacted by WARNs, again, we're very high on the state scale. We only receive a quarter of the amount per WARN impacted individual than compared to the state average. And this is an area where, as you know, the cost is extremely high. Cost of staff, cost of facilities, and yet because of the formula, we receive fewer dollars than most every place in the state. We've been fairly successful at raising additional monies. Of course, we have to do that every year. We do receive some multi-year grants. We have a couple right now from the Department of Labor, but it's challenging to maintain services with continual funding cuts. There are economic advantages. Clearly, our employers draw their labor force from the entire region, and not just from Santa Clara County, not just from San Mateo County. In fact, from San Benito, from Santa Cruz, from Alameda, from San Francisco. By working together as a region, we can share and take full advantage of the employers, and we are rich with jobs here. We can present a regional approach when we go out to meet the business community so that they don't have to work with a number of us, all who have different rules and standards and so forth. We can be integrated. We also have the ProMatch program, which is known throughout the region for serving professional unemployed individuals, many of them dislocated workers. And we draw ProMatch customers from as far away as Stockton, San Francisco, Santa Cruz, Gilroy, all over, because we have a high quality of services, and of course because we have jobs in our region. That's what they come for. I want to just mention a couple of major successes. One of them is a project called the Interactive Advertising Bureau. This is a really good example of the role that a workforce board can play in the community. The IAB is an organization of members that are internet content publishers. 700 members, mostly in the Bay Area, mostly in New York. So really those two areas. They came to us with a need for what in any other area would be a high skill area. We called it a middle skill for digital advertising and the data analytics that support digital advertising. They couldn't find a training program. Their members say, they would hire as many graduates as we could produce. We were able to take them and introduce them to the College of San Mateo, who within 9 months developed a training program according to their needs, paid for by them. The first class will be completing next month of some 35 individuals, many of them, but not all, Workforce Board customers. That gives us a new training program. They're about to start another round, and while it's going on, again, paid for by the IAB, they're pursuing academic accreditation from the state, which generally takes a year or two. So in the meantime, we have customers in class. We're trying to connect up the career paths around that skill. Essentially, it's a new job. There's not really a job title for it yet. So we have Job Train in the room here, who is a service provider of ours in San Mateo County. They have a coding class. It's a very entry-level class to help people, low-skilled people for the most part, get a foot on the career ladder in tech. It's really just the beginning stage. Some of the folks who graduated from their class went on to the IAB class at the College of San Mateo, and we hope next month will go to work for IAB members. So that's just an example of the role we can play in convening employers, like Roseanne's members, in working with the educators here, like the College of San Mateo and the district, and adult ed partners, economic development partners, local government. So all I can say really is we want to thank you for your trust that you brought us in to administer your programs. I think it's an advantage to both Santa Clara and San Mateo County that we're working together. And I invite you to participate with us in our strategic planning and procurement process. I'll answer any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. Questions, comments?
I just want to comment on what a great job you've done and how innovative you've been, considering how much money you're not getting.
Thank
I
you.
mean, sometimes it's difficult to, kind of keep your head above water and do more innovative things when, you're sort of treading water, so to speak. But you've done a great job, and I really appreciate the work you've done.
Thanks very much.
Supervisor Groom.
Yeah, I mean, there was a real nervousness when our Workforce Investment Bureau was being transitioned to NOVA, but I think that all of those worries were for naught, and clearly the large size of this makes it immensely more doable.
Thank you. Supervisor Horsley.
I just commend you on developing an outstanding board with Roseanne.
Our chair is from San Mateo County. Chris Galley is with 10X.
Very nice.
Another great board member. Thanks.
Thank you. I was just curious if Roseanne Faust wanted to say anything while she's here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd actually like to take this opportunity to thank the Board of Supervisors, because I know that there were questions when this first came to be, when the merger happened. And it's really been exciting to see over the last year, even before I joined the board, how NOVA has approached San Mateo County as a true partner, as a benefit to the greater region for workforce development, and now joining the board and being able to participate in the strategic planning efforts. I'm excited. I love how they enroll people right from the get-go, the programs that they've developed, and the respect that they have among workforce development boards throughout the state of California. So thank you for your support, and my appreciation to Chris and her team. Anytime we have a question, they're on it. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. We do need to take, a 5-minute break right now to reload the tapes, and we'll reconvene in 5 minutes. Okay, we're back. So we'll move on now to item number 5, which is a excuse me, Measure A, resolution approving a one-time $190,000 grant of district-specific Measure A funds to the City of Belmont Parks and Recreation Department to expand programs and services for youth. Supervisor Groom?
Thank you very much. This is to help expand and enhance the Belmont Park and Rec Department, especially for teens. As you know, we always have lots of programs for the little kids, but we don't always have really solid, strong programs for teens. And so this will be a place for teens to go and have Homework Central, have some good new recreation programs, be able to have teen socialization, and it will include a little bit of work on the Barrett Community Center in Belmont. And so I would recommend that we approve this Measure A District 2 grant of $190,000 to the City of Belmont.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion passes. Thank you, Supervisor Groom. Sorry, we have one speaker.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
It's Martin Fox.
No, please don't waive
You
your
could
time.
approach the podium so we could hear you.
Can't hear you.
I'm not going to waste your time. The San Mateo Daily Journal this morning again documents the potholes and the outdated storage or drainage system that Belmont has. And we need infrastructure help. We don't need more staff. We need potholes so that the parents can pick the kids up from the library and not have to worry about damaging their car. Thank you.
Now we'll move to item number 6, which is a resolution approving a grant of up to $250,000 to the Peninsula Open Space Trust for
Okay.
for emergency repairs. Supervisor Horsley.
Well, this is a road in the south part of our county. It's Cloverdale Road, and it's really what would happen was kind of an interesting.
Where is Cloverdale Road?
It's off of Pescadero Creek Road.
Oh, yeah.
It's way out there. It's by Pescadero. In any case, what it is, alongside of our rural roads are our ditches. And we used to actually maintain the ditches, but because of the fact that, we have to require all these different permits from all these different federal and state agencies, a lot of the ditches have not been maintained over the years. And in any case, what happened after a storm is that instead of the water flowing through these ditches and into a culvert back into the creek, and the creek actually is Buteno Creek, the whole section just gave way. And so we ended up with it's a 75-foot by 100-foot gully, came with about 20 feet of Cloverdale Road. So we estimate there was about 4,000 cubic yards of sediment that was lost with the stormwater carrying that material right back into Buteno Creek, which is an area, as you know, we just recently had to dredge to take care of a lot of the sediment out so that to prevent flooding of the town. In any case, this Post is working in conjunction with us, and we've agreed that our county, or us, our Public Works Department, and Post will share in the cost, and the cost we've agreed to share in the cost up to basically $250,000. In any case, Post is actually going to handle the construction, so we'll actually be turning over the contribution or reimbursing them up to $250,000, depending on their final cost. But the actual project is not only being worked on by Post, but it's also the Resource Conservation District as well. And we do have a representative from Post who you may wish, I don't know if Dan wants to speak. Okay. Sure.
Thank you, Supervisor Horsley and honorable supervisors. I've got a photo there that I've given to the clerk that sort of demonstrates better than any of us can do in words what happened over the course of just 24 to 48 hours off of Cloverdale Road down there south of Pescadero. This is sort of along the county's right-of-way and also onto our property, which is why we've been involved in the project. And as the supervisor described, this all happened pretty quickly. We were able to sort of jump on the project to prevent it from getting worse. This is just upstream from the Buteno Creek Bridge on Cloverdale Road across Buteno Creek. So we were concerned about losing more of our land as well as potential impacts to the road. So we did an emergency repair during the storm, during the rains last March, and then have been working as quickly as possible, closely with the county, with Public Works, with staff from Supervisor Horsley's office, as well as with the RCD, to get all the permits in place that we need to get this put in a permanent solution to protect the county's infrastructure and our land and the county's land before we get more rains this year. Rains came a little early, but I haven't heard that this has gotten any worse with the rains that we had over the weekend. But we're prepared. We do have all the permits in place. We have the contractors ready to work, and they're actually ready to start work tomorrow. So I really appreciate the efforts of you, Supervisor Horsley, and your staff. I wanted to recognize Deborah Hurst on your staff, who's been a great partner on this, as well as Joe Lococo from County Public Works, as well as a couple of staff from the RCD, in particular Sarah Polgar and Irina Kogan, who have worked really hard, particularly on the very, very complex permitting issues for this project. So thanks for all of you for bringing this up for us, and we're ready to go.
Thank you.
I'll make a motion to pass a resolution approving the grant of up to $250,000 to the Peninsula Open Space Trust for emergency repairs to the gully.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes. Move to item number 7, which is another Measure A request to do a geotechnical study on the replacement of a water tank in Lomamar. Supervisor Horsley.
I'm glad to talk about this item as well. There is a water tank serving the community of Lomamar, a pretty small group of folks, and it's pretty much of an antiquated tank, and they really want to replace it. When we talked about or looked at replacing this tank on this particular site, this was an acquisition. The land was an acquisition that we recently received from an environmental agency. I think it actually came from Post, but there wasn't really an encroachment permit on the particular property. So what we've talked to the Lomamar folks is that if you want to replace those water tanks, we need to have a geotechnical study. Now, this is a very small group. They don't have a lot of money, and so we are assisting them by paying for the geotechnical study of this particular replacement for the community of Lomamar. If you have any questions, be glad to answer them. Otherwise, I'll make a motion to approve the resolution authorizing appropriation transfer, Measure A revenue, in the amount of $13,000 for a non-departmental service to the Parks Department for the completion of a geotechnical study.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, Supervisor Horsley. Now we'll move to County Manager's report, which is report number 20 of 2016.
Yes, thank you very much, President Slocum, members of the board. I just wanted to quickly highlight the unveiling of a new web redesign by Public Works. It's much more user-friendly for visitors. It's easy to navigate. It's interactive. And it really should give those visitors regular updates on roads, utilities, airports, and surveying and maps. So I would encourage everyone to visit that site.
Thank you. Move to item number 9, board reports. Start with Supervisor Tissier.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have 2 adjourned memories. The first one is of Esther Friedman. She passed away at home just shy of her 100th birthday. She was born in Indianapolis, Indiana, moved to San Diego when she was 6 years old, and then ended up moving to San Francisco after she met the love of her life, Jack Friedman. She had many interests and hobbies, and she was a very skilled tennis player. She had 2 children, Trudy and Daryl, and she enjoyed her many happy years together with her husband until his untimely passing in 1965. She was also a voracious reader. She used to work at Hale's department store in the book department, and she also was an employee of the 7-Up Bottling Company. She and her husband, Jack, were founding members of San Francisco City of Hope chapter. She was also an active member in Beth Israel Sisterhood and the president of the Kappa Nu Mothers Club. She leaves behind her children, Trudy and Daryl, and many grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Her kindness, warmth, and generosity will be missed by all that knew her. She was a lovely lady. And I have a second adjourned memory. The retired superintendent Tom Minshew from the Jefferson Union High School District recently passed away after a courageous battle with cancer. He was an exceptional individual who had a positive impact on the lives of his students, his staff, parents, colleagues, and his family. He retired after serving our community in many capacities over his lengthy career, and that was also a product of Pacifica. And he was also an active contributor to those communities as well. And where I got to know him was through the Daly City Youth Health Center, because that's a collaboration with the county and the Jefferson Union High School District, and he will be sorely missed. Wonderful guy. Also, just a quick couple announcements. Next Tuesday is Seniors on the Move at San Mateo County Event Center. Please join us. If you have not signed up yet, feel free to contact my office or the office of Congresswoman Spear. And it starts at 9 a.m., it opens at 9 a.m., starts at 10, and ends at 3. And our final Age Well, Drive Smart seminar for 2016 will be in Belmont at Twin Pines Lodge on Thursday, November 10th from 9:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. So last chance, folks, for this year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Supervisor Groom.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. President. I have the sad duty today to ask us to adjourn in memory of Carol Ann Fitzgerald, wife of Bob Fitzgerald, daughter of Sue and Bill Kenny, long time residents in this county. She died of pancreatic cancer, and so and she leaves 3 wonderful children, Aaron, Ryan, and Quinn. She made such an impact on her family, on the community. She was just a wonderful person, and clearly has been taken just too early from us. But we really extend our sympathy to her husband and to her children. And this is my last announcement too of the annual conference. This is called Parks Forever. It's Friday, October 21st at the Belmont Library. Starts at 8:30 a.m. Be over at noon. We are celebrating the National Park Service as well as the local parks. Great speakers, Lisa Manget, who is the Director of California State Parks, Aaron Roth, who is the General Superintendent of the Golden Gate National Recreation Center, and our own Marlene Finley to talk about parks in San Mateo County. So Friday at the Belmont Library.
Nice, thank you. Supervisor Horsley.
Well, it's a little bit repetitive, but I was asked by a constituent of Pacifica to read this about Tom Minshew. He was, as Adrian said, he was the superintendent of Jefferson Union High School District. He was a veteran and had a career, obviously a career in education. He had to resign because he had cancer and he was dying essentially. But he was before he died, he was inducted into the Terra Nova High School Hall of Fame. As a Terra Nova student, Tom was outspoken and he was described as a radical member of the class of 1976. He was popular among his classmates, and he's been described as genuine, generous, and a bit of a prankster. Post-high school, Tom enlisted in the United States Army as a specialist 5th class parachute rigger and received novice parachute wings, an Army Commendation Medal, and a Good Conduct Medal during his 3 years of service. His love of country and his history led him to seek out a degree and teaching credential in history and a master's in educational administration from SF State. Entire 22 years career in education was dedicated to the Jefferson Union High School District, where he himself attended high school. He's a hometown guy through and through. After student teaching at Jefferson High School, he returned to his alma mater, Terra Nova, and there he served in a multitude of capacities: teacher, advisor, athletic director, coach, attendance supervisor, vice principal of administration, vice principal of guidance, and eventually principal. His hard work and dedication and quick climb up the ranks at his school did not go unnoticed, and in 2011 he was appointed the superintendent. There he was finally able to bring his vision for our schools to life, and through his leadership, district developed strong, comprehensive curriculum using technology that enabled our students to move forward, feeling more prepared for today's world. Tom retired in the spring of 2016 with commendation for his life's work of developing young minds and appreciation for all that he had done to enhance this district.
Thank you. I have no report, so I believe we can stand adjourned.
This is kind of a sad one, this guy.